in the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, where secrets hide behind lace curtains, an emerald brooch vanishes from Ashford Manor, sparking whispers of a cunning Russian countess. Why does a cryptic map point to a hidden treasure? Who is the cloaked figure lurking in the shadows? And what dark truth lies locked in a locket, waiting to unravel a century-old betrayal? Miss Jane Marple, with her unassuming knitting and razor-sharp mind, steps into a dangerous game of deception, where every clue could lead to answers or doom. Chapter 1. The Whisper in St. Mary Mead. The morning sun draped St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, its light filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's modest cottage. The village, nestled in the rolling English countryside, hummed, with the quiet rhythm of routine milk bottles clinking on doorsteps, the distant bark of a dog, and the soft chatter of sparrows. Miss Marple, seated at her rosewood table with a cup of Earl Grey, was already attuned to the day's pulse. Her knitting needles clicked in a steady cadence, a scarf of soft blue wool growing beneath her deft fingers. But her mind, sharp as ever, was not on the stitches. It was on the whisper she'd caught the previous day at Mrs. Bantry's tea shop, a whisper that had set her keen instincts alight. The tea shop, a quaint establishment with mismatched china and gingham tablecloths, was the heart of village gossip. Yesterday, as Miss Marple sipped her tea and nibbled a scone, she'd overheard Mrs. Pauke, the postmistress, lean toward Mrs. Wetherby, the florist, with a conspiratorial hush. That new countess at Darrington Hall, Mrs. Pauke had said, her voice low but not low enough, Lady Evelyn de Vere. They say she's dripping in jewels, but no one knows where she came from. Not a soul. And those eyes of hers sharp, like she's hiding something. Mrs. Wetherby had nodded, her pince-nez glinting. Mark my words, there's a story there. No one moves to St. Mary Mead without a reason. Miss Marple had kept her gaze on her scone, crumbling it absently, but her ears had sharpened. A countess in St. Mary Mead was rare enough, but one shrouded in mystery was a puzzle begging to be solved. She knew better than to trust village gossip outright. It was often embroidered with fancy, but there was always a thread of truth to be plucked from the tangle. And so this morning, as she sipped her tea, she resolved to observe Lady Evelyn de Vere at the earliest opportunity. The village charity bazaar, set for that afternoon in the church hall, would be the perfect place to begin. The bazaar was a yearly affair, a bustling event where the villagers sold homemade jams, knitted scarves, and slightly lopsided cakes to raise funds for the church roof, which seemed to need repairing with predictable regularity. Miss Marple, dressed in her usual tweed skirt and a prim cardigan, arrived early, her straw hat tilted just so. The hall was a riot of color and noise. Children darted between tables, clutching sticky toffees. Mrs. Bantry presided over a stall of questionable watercolors, and the vicar, Mr. Clement, flitted about, trying to keep the chaos in check. Miss Marple, however, had eyes only for the woman who had just entered, drawing every gaze like a magnet. Lady Evelyn de Vere was impossible to miss. Tall and statuesque, she moved with the grace of a swan, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her dress, a deep emerald silk, shimmered in the sunlight, streaming through the hall's high windows. A single strand of pearls gleamed at her throat, and her gloved hands held a small reticule with a clasp that caught the light like a winking eye. But it was her demeanor that intrigued Miss Marple most. Lady Evelyn smiled and nodded at the villagers. "Greetings," but her eyes green as her dress darted with a watchfulness that belied her polished charm. She was, Miss Marple thought, like a cat among pigeons, aware of every flutter around her dot. Miss Marple positioned herself at the jam stall, where Mrs. Polk was busy extolling the virtues of her gooseberry preserve. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Polk," Miss Marple said, her voice mild as milk. "Such a lovely turnout. And I see we have a distinguished guest." She nodded toward Lady Evelyn, who was now inspecting a tray of lemon tarts at Mrs. Weatherby's. Mrs. Polk's eyes gleamed. "Oh, yes, Miss Marple. Lady Evelyn's been ever so generous, donated £50 to the roof fund already, but—" she leaned closer, her voice dropping. "There's something about her, isn't there? Too polished, if you ask me, like she's playing a part." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her fingers adjusting a jar of jam. "People often do, Mrs. Polk, especially when they're new to a place. It takes time to settle." But her mind was already turning, noting the Countess's every move. Lady Evelyn had paused at a stall of embroidered linens, her gloved fingers brushing a tablecloth as she exchanged words with Mrs. Bantry. The conversation seemed pleasant, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting tension in the Countess's posture, a slight stiffening of her shoulders, as if Mrs. Bantry's chatter had touched a nerve dot as the afternoon wore on. Miss Marple circulated, her presence as unremarkable as a shadow. She complimented Mrs. Weatherby's roses, helped a child retrieve a dropped shilling, and listened to Mr. Clement's earnest speech about community spirit. All the while she kept Lady Evelyn in her peripheral vision. The Countess was adept at mingling her laughter bright but never too loud, her compliments generous but never effusive. Yet there was a calculated quality to her charm, as if each smile were measured, each word chosen with care. The turning point came near the end of the bazaar, when the crowd had thinned and the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the hall. Miss Marple had settled on a bench near the tea-urn, her knitting in her lap, when she noticed Lady Evelyn slip toward the back of the hall, where a curtained alcove led to the vestry. The Countess glanced over her shoulder, not nervously, but with the practiced caution of someone used to being watched, before disappearing behind the curtain. Miss Marple's needles paused. She waited a moment, then rose, murmuring an excuse about needing fresh air. She moved toward the alcove, her steps slow and deliberate, her frail appearance a perfect disguise for her purpose. The vestry door was ajar, and through the gap she glimpsed Lady Evelyn standing near a small table, her reticule open. A letter, folded but unsealed, lay in her hand. She was reading it, her brow furrowed, her lips moving slightly, as if memorizing its contents. Then, with a swift motion, she tucked it back into her reticule, but not swiftly enough. The letter slipped, fluttering to the floor. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she remained still, hidden by the curtain's edge. Lady Evelyn bent to retrieve the letter, her movements graceful but hurried. As she straightened, her eyes swept the room, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she'd been seen. But the Countess's gaze passed over her, dismissing the elderly spinster as no threat. Lady Evelyn returned to the main hall, her composure restored, and rejoined the dwindling crowd. Miss Marple waited until the Countess was engrossed in a conversation with the vicar before slipping into the vestry. The letter was gone, but the table bore a faint smudge of ink, as if the letter had been freshly written. Miss Marple bent closer, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. The smudge was not random. It formed the edge of a word, though too faint to read. She straightened, her mind racing. A letter, a secret moment, a guarded glance, small pieces, but enough to form the outline of a puzzle. Back in the hall, Miss Marple resumed her place at the jam stall, her expression serene. Mrs. Ponk was still there, now gossiping with a newcomer about Lady Evelyn's rumored wealth. "They say she's got a vault full of jewels," Mrs. Ponk whispered, "but no husband, no family. Where's it all come from, I ask you?" Miss Marple smiled, her thoughts elsewhere. Jewels, perhaps, but secrets were far more valuable. She watched as Lady Evelyn made her farewells, her emerald dress catching the last rays of sunlight as she stepped into a sleek black car waiting outside. The car's driver, a man with a sharp jaw and a cap pulled low, opened the door for her with a deference that seemed almost theatrical. As the car pulled away, Miss Marple noted its license plate, a detail she would later share with her nephew, Raymond, who had contacts in useful places. That evening, back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting idle in her lap. The letter, the ink smudge, the Countess's guarded eyes, they were fragments, but fragments she knew how to weave together. She thought of her old friend, Dolly Bantry, who had once remarked that Miss Marple saw more from her armchair than most detectives saw in a lifetime. It was true in a way. People were predictable, their habits and fears as clear to her as the stitches in her scarf. And Lady Evelyn, for all her polish, was no exception. Miss Marple rose and fetched her notebook, a small leather-bound volume she kept for such occasions. She jotted down her observations, the letter, the Countess's tension, the driver's demeanor. Then she paused, her pen hovering. The bazaar had been a beginning, a single thread pulled from the fabric of Lady Evelyn's carefully crafted facade. There would be more threads, more clues, and Miss Marple would find them. She closed the notebook and smiled faintly. The game, as her dear friend Sir Henry Clithering might say, was afoot. As the fire crackled and the village settled into its quiet night, Miss Marple felt a familiar thrill. St. Mary Mead might seem a sleepy place, but beneath its surface lay stories waiting to be uncovered. And this story, she sensed, would be one of her most intriguing yet. Chapter 2. The Countess's Masquerade. The invitation arrived at Miss Marple's cottage on a crisp morning, its cream envelope embossed with the crest of Darrington Hall. The elegant script requested her presence at a masked ball, a grand affair, to mark Lady Evelyn de Vere's official welcome to St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple, peering at the card through her spectacles, felt a flicker of anticipation. A masked ball was a stage for secrets, and she was eager to observe the Countess in her element. Her fingers traced the invitation's edge as she considered the possibilities. The letter she'd glimpsed at the bazaar, with its smudged ink and furtive handling, lingered in her mind like a half-solved crossword. The evening of the ball found St. Mary Mead abuzz, its quiet lanes alive with the hum of cars winding toward Darrington Hall. Miss Marple, dressed in a modest black gown and a silver lace mask that lent her an air of understated mystery, stepped from the vicar's borrowed Ford with the grace of a woman who knew her plainness was her greatest disguise. The hall loomed before her, its stone facade aglow with torchlight, windows spilling golden warmth into the night. Ivy clung to its walls, and the air carried the scent of late roses and polished leather dot inside. The ballroom was a spectacle of opulence. Chandeliers glittered like constellations, their light dancing across silk gowns and velvet jackets. A string quartet played a lilting waltz, and masked figures swirled across the parquet floor, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne flutes. Miss Marple, standing near a marble pillar, her fan fluttering gently, took it all in. The villagers, unaccustomed to such grandeur, mingled awkwardly with Lady Evelyn's invited gentry, their masks unable to hide their self-conscious delight. Lady Evelyn herself was impossible to miss. She glided through the crowd in a gown of midnight blue, its bodice studded with tiny sapphires that caught the light like stars. Her mask, a delicate filigree of gold, framed eyes that scanned the room with a predator's focus. She greeted guests with a smile that was both warm and distant, her voice carrying the faintest trace of an accent French, perhaps, or something more elusive. Miss Marple noted how the Countess's gloved hand lingered on certain guests. Arms, her laughter a touch too bright when she spoke to a tall man in a black domino mask. The man intrigued Miss Marple. He was lean, with a posture that suggested both confidence and caution, and his mask concealed all but a sharp jaw and a thin mouth that rarely smiled. He introduced himself to others as Mr. Harrow, a friend of the family, but his accent wavered, now crisp and English, now softened by a continental lilt. Miss Marple, sipping a glass of elderflower cordial, positioned herself near a potted palm, where she could overhear their conversation without drawing notice. "Everything is in place, Evelyn," Mr. Harrow murmured, his voice low beneath the music. "The shipment arrives tomorrow. We must be precise." Lady Evelyn's fan paused mid-flutter. "Precision is my specialty, darling," she replied, her tone light but laced with steel. "But the venue, has it been secured?" Mr. Harrow nodded, his mask tilting slightly. "The old mill. Midnight. No one will suspect." Miss Marple's fan moved slowly, her face serene, but her mind was awhirl. A shipment. A midnight meeting at the old mill, a derelict structure on the edge of the village, long abandoned. The words were vague, but their secrecy was not. She recalled the letter from the bazaar, its hurried concealment, and wondered if it held the details of this shipment. Her instincts, honed by years of unraveling village intrigues, told her this was no mere social exchange. As the waltz ended, Lady Evelyn excused herself, drifting toward a group of local gentry. Mr. Harrow lingered, his eyes following her before. He slipped through a side door leading to the terrace. Miss Marple, ever unobtrusive, waited a moment before following, her steps muffled by the thick carpet. The terrace was bathed in moonlight, its stone balustrade cool under her touch. Mr. Harrow stood alone, lighting a cigarette, the flare of the match briefly illuminating his masked face. He glanced around, then pulled a small notebook from his pocket, scribbling something before tucking it away. Miss Marple retreated before he could spot her, her heart beating a little faster. The notebook, like the letter, was another piece of the puzzle. She returned to the ballroom, where the crowd had grown merrier, the wine loosening tongues. She joined Mrs. Bantry, who was resplendent in a peacock-feathered mask, and steered the conversation toward Lady Evelyn. "Such a charming hostess," Miss Marple said, her tone admiring. "But so mysterious. Do you know much about her, Dolly?" Mrs. Bantry, ever eager for gossip, leaned in. "Not a whit, Jane. She's like something out of a novel, rich, beautiful, and not a soul knows her past. They say she inherited her title from a distant cousin, but there's talk of a scandal in Paris, or was it Vienna?" She waved a hand. "Anyway, she's got half the village dazzled and the other half suspicious." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to Lady Evelyn, who was now laughing with the vicar. The Countess's poise was flawless, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward the terrace, where Mr. Harrow had reappeared. Their eyes met briefly, a silent communication that Miss Marple filed away for later dot. As the evening wore on, she danced a slow quadrille with Mr. Clement, her steps precise despite her age. The vicar, flustered by the grandeur, confided that Lady Evelyn had promised a substantial donation to the church, but her insistence on privacy made him uneasy. "She's generous, Miss Marple," he said, "but there's a coldness to her, like she's always watching." Miss Marple smiled, patting his arm. "People often are, vicar, when they have something to protect." Her words were gentle, but her mind was already piecing together the fragments: the letter, the shipment, the old mill, Mr. Harrow's notebook. Each was a thread in a tapestry she was only beginning to see. The ball drew to a close near midnight, the guests spilling onto the lawn to watch a display of fireworks. Miss Marple, pleading fatigue, slipped away early, her mind too full for further pleasantries. She walked home through the quiet lanes, the stars bright above, her thoughts turning over the evening's discoveries. The Countess was no mere eccentric, aristocrat. She was orchestrating something clandestine, and Mr. Harrow was her accomplice. The old mill, she decided, would be her next point of inquiry, though she would need to tread carefully. St. Mary Mead might be a village, but its secrets were as tangled as any city's. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple lit a single candle and opened her notebook. She wrote down the overheard words, shipment, old mill, midnight, and sketched a rough map of the mill's location, a mile beyond the village's edge. Then she paused, her pen hovering. The Countess's mask had hidden her face, but not her intent. And Mr. Harrow, with his shifting accent and furtive notebook, was a piece that didn't quite fit. She closed the notebook and gazed into the candle's flame, her lips curving into a faint smile. The ball had been a masquerade in more ways than one, but Miss Marple was adept at seeing through disguises. Tomorrow she would begin to unravel the Countess's game dot as the candle flickered, casting shadows across her cozy parlor. Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of a mystery taking shape. The night was still, but her mind was alive, weaving the first strands of a net that would, in time, ensnare a devious countess. Chapter 3. The Countess's Masquerade. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, curling around the ankles of early risers like a curious cat. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. The village was quiet, but her mind buzzed with the peculiar details of the past week. The arrival of Countess Irina Volkov had stirred the sleepy hamlet, and the whispers of scandal followed her like a shadow. The Countess with her sharp cheekbones and sharper tongue, had taken up residence at the grand but crumbling Ashford Manor, and her presence was anything but subtle. Her lavish parties, attended by an eclectic mix of strangers from London and beyond, had tongues wagging. But it was the theft of Lady Ashford's emerald brooch, a family heirloom that had set the village alight with suspicion. Miss Marple's eyes, bright and unyielding despite her age, flickered toward the garden. She had seen the Countess only once, at the village fete, where Irina's crimson gown and imperious demeanor had drawn every gaze. Yet it was not her beauty that intrigued Miss Marple, but the faint, almost imperceptible flicker of calculation in her eyes, a look Jane knew well from her years of observing human nature. The brooch's disappearance, reported 2 days ago, coincided too neatly with Irina's arrival. And then there was the matter of the stranger, a man in a gray overcoat, seen lingering near the manor's gates the night of the theft. The village constable, a well-meaning but plodding man, had dismissed it as coincidence. Miss Marple, however, did not believe in coincidences. She set her knitting aside and reached for her notebook, its pages filled with neat, spidery handwriting. The Countess was hosting another gathering tonight, a masquerade ball, and Miss Marple had secured an invitation through her old friend, Mrs. Bantry, who was on the manor's guest list. A chance to observe, Jane murmured to herself, and perhaps to unmask more than just faces. The air inside Ashford Manor was thick with the scent of roses and wax, the chandeliers casting a golden glow over the masked figures swirling across the ballroom. Miss Marple, dressed in a modest lavender gown and a simple lace mask, blended into the crowd with the ease of a sparrow among peacocks. Her eyes darted from one guest to another, noting the way the Countess moved among them, her laughter bright, but her glances sharp, like a hawk assessing prey. Irina's mask, a confection of black feathers and silver filigree, did little to hide her commanding presence. She was speaking to a tall man in a velvet domino, his voice low and foreign, his gestures too precise to be casual. Miss Marple sipped her lemonade, her ears attuned to the hum of conversation. The theft of the brooch had not been mentioned tonight, but the undercurrent of unease was palpable. Lady Ashford, a frail woman with a penchant for dramatics, stood near the fireplace, her mask dangling from her hand as she whispered to her nephew, Colin, a nervous young man with a habit of tugging at his collar. Miss Marple had known Colin since he was a boy, always eager to please, but easily swayed. She made a mental note to speak with him later. A sudden hush fell over the room as the Countess clapped her hands. "My dear friends," she called, her accent a velvet purr, "tonight is for secrets and surprises. Let us play a game of treasure hunt. Hidden somewhere in this manor is a prize, a jewel of great beauty. Find it, and you shall have a reward beyond your dreams." The guests murmured excitedly, their masks glinting as they turned to one another. Miss Marple's lips twitched. A treasure hunt, in a house where a valuable brooch had just been stolen? The Countess was either brazen or desperate. Jane's gaze followed Irina as she glided toward a side door, the man in the velvet domino at her side. They slipped into the corridor, and Miss Marple, with the stealth of long practice, followed. The corridor was dimly lit, the walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Ashfords. Miss Marple kept her distance, her soft-soled shoes silent on the parquet floor. She heard the low murmur of voices ahead, the Countess's tone sharp, the man's urgent. "You promised it would be done by now," Irina hissed. "The brooch was only the beginning. If we don't secure the rest—" "Patience," the man interrupted, his voice accented Russian, perhaps. "The buyer is ready, but we must be careful. The old woman suspects." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene. She pressed herself against the wall, hidden by a velvet curtain, as the pair moved toward a spiral staircase leading to the manor's upper floors. She waited until their footsteps faded, then followed, her curiosity outweighing her caution. The staircase creaked under her weight, but the music from the ballroom below masked the sound. At the top she found herself in a narrow hallway lined with locked doors. One stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling onto the floor. Peering inside, she saw a small study, its desk littered with papers, and a single candle burning low. The Countess and the man were gone, but the room felt alive with secrets. Miss Marple stepped inside, her fingers brushing the desk. A letter, half hidden beneath a blotter, caught her eye. It was written in a hurried hand, the ink smudged. "The emerald is safe. Meet me at the old mill, midnight. Bring the map." The signature was a single initial. V. Miss Marple's mind raced. The emerald, surely the brooch, and a map? This was no ordinary theft. She tucked the letter into her reticule, her movements swift and precise. As she turned to leave, a shadow fell across the doorway. She froze, her heart steady, but her senses alert. It was Colin, his mask pushed up to reveal a flushed, anxious face. "Miss Marple, what are you doing here?" She smiled, her voice gentle. "Just admiring the view, dear boy. These old houses have such charm, don't they?" He hesitated, his eyes darting to the desk. "You shouldn't be here. It's private." "Of course," she said, stepping toward the door. "But tell me, Colin, have you seen the Countess? She seems so fond of games." His face darkened. "She's trouble, Miss Marple. I heard her talking to that man, the one in the domino. They mentioned my aunt's brooch and something about a map. I don't know what it means, but I don't trust her." Miss Marple patted his arm. "You're a good boy, Colin. Keep your eyes open, and don't let anyone bully you into silence." He nodded, his jaw tight, and she slipped past him, her mind already piecing together the puzzle. The Countess, the man in the domino, the letter, the map, it all pointed to something larger than a stolen brooch. But what? Back in the ballroom, the treasure hunt was in full swing, guests laughing as they searched behind curtains and under tables. Miss Marple observed from a corner, her thoughts elsewhere. The letter suggested a rendezvous at the old mill, a derelict structure on the edge of the village. If the Countess was involved in the theft, and if this map was real, the mill might hold answers. But going alone was risky, and Miss Marple was no fool. She needed an ally. She found Mrs. Bantry near the refreshment table, her friend's eyes sparkling with gossip. "Jane, you look positively conspiratorial," Dolly Bantry said, offering her a glass of punch. "What's afoot?" Miss Marple leaned close, her voice low. "Dolly, do you still have that old bicycle of Arthur's? I may need to borrow it tonight." Mrs. Bantry's eyebrows shot up. "A midnight ride? Jane, you're up to something. Tell me everything." "Not now," Miss Marple said, her smile faint but firm. "But if you hear of any trouble at the old mill, send Constable Reed. And don't ask questions. You know I'll tell you later." Dolly sighed dramatically, but nodded. "You're incorrigible, Jane. Be careful." The night was cold, the moon a thin crescent, casting long shadows across the fields. Miss Marple pedaled steadily, her lavender gown tucked into her boots, her reticule slung across her shoulder. The old mill loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the sky. She hid the bicycle behind a hedge and crept closer, her senses sharp. The mill's door was ajar, and a faint light flickered within. She slipped inside, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The air smelled of dust and damp wood, and the creak of the floorboards seemed deafening in the silence. Voices came from above, where the mill's loft overlooked the river. Miss Marple climbed the rickety stairs, her hand gripping the rail. At the top, she peered through a gap in the boards. The Countess stood in the center of the loft, her mask gone, her face pale but resolute. The man in the domino was there, too, holding a small leather case. A third figure, cloaked and hooded, stood in the shadows, their face obscured. "The map," Irina said, her voice cold. "You have it?" The cloaked figure nodded, producing a folded parchment. "It's all here, the location, the markers. But the price has gone up. The brooch was a test. If you want the rest, I need assurances." Irina's eyes narrowed. "You dare renegotiate? After all I've done?" The man in the domino stepped forward, his hand on her arm. "Irina, enough. We pay, or we lose everything." Miss Marple's mind whirled. The map, what did it lead to? Not just the brooch, clearly, but something of greater value. She shifted slightly, and her floorboard groaned beneath her. The trio froze, their heads turning toward the sound. "Who's there?" Irina called, her voice sharp as a blade. Miss Marple held her breath, but it was too late. The cloaked figure moved swiftly, their hand darting to a pocket. Miss Marple stepped into the light, her expression calm. "Only an old woman, my dear," she said, her voice steady. "I seem to have lost my way." Irina's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Miss Marple, how unexpected." The man in the domino took a step toward her, but Irina raised a hand. "No, Victor. She's harmless. Aren't you, Miss Marple?" Jane smiled, her eyes never leaving Irina's. "Oh, quite. But I do have a knack for noticing things. Like that letter on your desk, Countess. Or the way you've been watching poor Cunning, as if he knows something he shouldn't." Irina's smile was icy. "You're clever, aren't you? But curiosity can be dangerous." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "But so can underestimating an old woman." The cloaked figure laughed, a low, guttural sound. "Enough of this. Victor, deal with her." Before Victor could move, a shout came from below. "Police!" "Nobody move." Constable Reed's voice, gruff and authoritative, echoed through the mill. Miss Marple's lips curved. Dolly had come through. Irina's face twisted with fury, but she was quick. She grabbed the map and bolted for a side door, Victor and the cloaked figure close behind. Miss Marple stepped aside, knowing pursuit was futile. Instead, she bent and picked up a small object that had fallen from Irina's pocket in her haste, a silver locket, engraved with a crest Miss Marple recognized from the Ashford family portraits. Constable Reed and his men stormed the loft. There, lanterns casting wild shadows. "Miss Marple!" Reed exclaimed, his face red with exertion. "What the devil are you doing here?" "Helping, I hope," she said, handing him the locket. "You'll want to look into this, Constable. And perhaps check the manor's library for a certain map." The next morning, St. Mary Mead buzzed with the news. The Countess had vanished, along with her mysterious companions, but the locket had led Constable Reed to a hidden compartment in the manor's library, where the emerald brooch was found along, with a map detailing the location of a long-lost Ashford treasure, buried somewhere on the estate. Miss Marple, sitting in her garden with a cup of tea, listened to Mrs. Bantry's breathless recounting of the events. "You're a marvel, Jane," Dolly said, shaking her head. "How did you know?" Miss Marple smiled, her knitting needles clicking softly. "People are much the same, Dolly, whether in St. Mary Mead or a grand manor. They want, they scheme, and they leave clues. You just have to look." As Dolly chattered on, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the Countess. Irina Volkov was still out there, and Jane had no doubt their paths would cross again. For now, though, the village was safe, and the mystery of the brooch was solved. But the map and the treasure it promised lingered in her mind, a puzzle for another day. Chapter 4. Shadows on the map. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of amber and rose. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles paused as she studied the folded parchment spread across her tea-table. It was a copy of the map found in Ashford Manor's library, kindly provided by Constable Reed, who, despite his gruff exterior, had come to value her insights. The map was old, its edges frayed, the ink faded but legible. It depicted the Ashford estate with cryptic symbols marking a path to what was labeled simply as the cache. Miss Marple's eyes traced the lines, her mind weaving through the events of the past week. The Countess Irina Volkov's sudden disappearance after the confrontation at the old mill had left the village in a state of uneasy excitement. Whispers of hidden treasure had spread like wildfire, fueled by the discovery of the emerald brooch and the map. Yet Miss Marple knew the Countess was not one to vanish without purpose. Irina's sharp intelligence and ruthless ambition suggested she was already plotting her next move. The locket Miss Marple had found, bearing the Ashford crest, hinted at a deeper connection between the Countess and the family's secrets, a connection Jane was determined to unravel. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Colin. Ashford, his face pale and his hands fidgeting with a crumpled handkerchief. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice tight, "I need your help. Something's happened, something awful." She ushered him inside, offering tea to steady his nerves. "Sit, Colin, and tell me everything, slowly, now." He sank into a chair, his eyes darting to the map. "It's Aunt Beatrice Lady Ashford. She's received a letter anonymous demanding the map. It says if we don't hand it over by tomorrow night, they'll burn the manor down." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Burn the manor? That's bold, even for our elusive Countess. Did the letter mention her?" Colin shook his head. "No, but it was written in a strange hand, almost like it was trying to mimic an old script. And there was a seal, a red wax seal with a double-headed eagle. I've never seen it before." Her eyes sharpened. A double-headed eagle was a symbol often associated with Russian nobility, a clue that pointed squarely at Irina or her associates. "May I see the letter, Colin?" "It's at the manor, but I can bring it tomorrow. Aunt Beatrice is terrified." Miss Marple She's talking about giving them the map, but I think there's more to it. The manor's been in our family for centuries. If there's treasure, it's ours, not some thief's." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning. "You're right to be cautious, dear boy. Leave this with me for now. And tell your aunt to lock her doors tonight. I'll visit tomorrow." After Colin left, she returned to the map, her fingers tracing a symbol near the estate's northern boundary, a circle with a cross, like a compass rose. It was near the old chapel, a ruin half buried in ivy, rarely visited except by curious children. Something about it nagged at her, a memory from her youth when she'd played there with her cousins. There had been a stone oddly placed with carvings worn by time. Could it be a marker? The next morning, Miss Marple set out for the chapel, her sturdy shoes crunching on the frost-kissed grass. The air was crisp, the sky a pale gray that promised snow. She carried her umbrella, less for weather than for the comfort of its weight. The chapel stood at the edge of the estate, its walls crumbling, but its arched doorway still intact. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through broken stained glass. The stone was there, half hidden by moss, its surface etched with faint lines. She knelt, brushing away dirt, and found the same circle and cross symbol from the map. Her heart quickened. This was no coincidence. She pressed the stone, expecting resistance, but it shifted slightly, revealing a hollow space beneath. Inside was a small iron box, rusted but intact. She hesitated, then lifted it free, her fingers trembling with anticipation. The box was locked, but its weight suggested contents of significance. She tucked it into her bag, her senses alert. As she stood, a shadow moved in the doorway, a figure in a dark coat, their face obscured by a scarf. "You're a persistent old woman," a voice said, low and accented. Not Irina, but familiar, the man in the velvet domino from the masquerade. Miss Marple's voice was calm, her grip on her umbrella firm. "And you're a long way from home." "Sir, Victor, isn't it?" The man stiffened, then laughed softly. "You're well informed, but you're meddling in dangerous affairs. Hand over the box, and I'll let you walk away." She tilted her head, her eyes steady. "I think not. You see, I've already sent word to Constable Reed. He'll be here shortly." Victor's smile faded. He took a step forward, but a rustle in the underbrush made him pause. Miss Marple seized the moment, swinging her umbrella with surprising force. It caught his shin, and he stumbled, cursing. She darted past him, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. The chapel's grounds were a maze of overgrown paths, and she moved quickly, slipping behind a yew tree as Victor's footsteps followed. She waited, her breath shallow, until she heard him mutter and retreat. Only then did she make her way back to the village, the box heavy in her bag. At home, she examined it under the light of her lamp. The lock was old but intricate, requiring a key she didn't have. She suspected the locket from the mill might hold a clue, but for now, the box would remain a mystery. That evening, Miss Marple visited Ashford Manor, where Lady Beatrice awaited her, wringing her hands. The letter lay on a side table, its red wax seal gleaming. Miss Marple examined it, noting the eagle's design, then turned to Beatrice. "Have you considered who might benefit from this threat? Someone close, perhaps?" Beatrice's eyes widened. Close? You don't think common? No, no, Miss Marple said gently, but someone familiar with the manor's secrets. Tell me, has anyone new been in your employ recently? Beatrice hesitated. There's the new maid, Anna. She came with Irina's recommendation, but she's been quiet, efficient. Surely not. Miss Marple's smile was faint. Perhaps we should have a word with Anna. The maid was summoned, a slight young woman, with nervous eyes. Under Miss Marple's gentle but relentless questioning, Anna's composure cracked. I didn't want to do it, she blurted, tears spilling. The Countess, she said she'd ruin my family if I didn't help. I passed. Her notes told her about the manor's rooms. I didn't know about the fire. Miss Marple patted her hand. There, child. You've done right by telling us. Now, where is the Countess hiding? Anna shook her head. I don't know. She meets someone at the Black Swan Inn in the next village. That's all I heard. Miss Marple wasted no time. With Constable Reed's reluctant approval, she and Mrs. Bantry, who insisted on joining the adventure, took a late train to the neighboring village. The Black Swan Inn was a squat, smoky place, its patrons a mix of locals and travelers. Miss Marple, disguised in Dolly's spare cloak and a wide-brimmed hat, sat in a corner, her eyes scanning the room. Dolly, ever the enthusiast, whispered, "This is thrilling, Jane, like something out of a novel." "Hush, Dolly," Miss Marple murmured, her gaze locking onto a figure at the bar. It was Irina, her hair hidden under a scarf, speaking to a man with a scarred cheek and a heavy coat. Their conversation was hushed, but Miss Marple caught fragments. The box, key, chapel, tomorrow night. She leaned back, her mind racing. The Countess was after the box, which meant it held something vital, perhaps the key to the treasure itself. But why the threats, the fire? Irina's desperation suggested a ticking clock, a buyer or a deadline pressing her to act as the pair left the inn. Miss Marple and Dolly followed at a distance, the night air sharp against their faces. The Countess and her companion entered a narrow alley, where a third figure waited the cloaked stranger from the mill. Miss Marple strained to hear, catching only a name, Dmitri. The trio spoke in low tones, their gestures tense, then parted ways, Irina heading toward a waiting car. Miss Marple turned to Dolly. We need to act quickly. Tomorrow night they'll come for the box. We must be ready. The next evening Miss Marple devised a plan. With Constable Reed's help, she arranged for the box to be placed in the manor's library, under guard. She suspected Irina would try to retrieve it, and the manor's labyrinthine halls offered a chance to trap her. Miss Marple herself waited in the shadows of the library, the box on a table, its lock untouched at midnight. A window creaked open, and Irina slipped inside, her movements silent as a cat's. She froze when she saw the box, her eyes narrowing. Too easy, she muttered, then spun as Miss Marple stepped into the light. Indeed. Countess, Miss Marple said, her voice calm, but sometimes the simplest traps are the most effective. Irina's hand darted toward her pocket, but Constable Reed and his men emerged from the shadows, their lanterns blazing. "You're under arrest, Countess Volkov," Reed barked, "for theft, extortion, and conspiracy." Irina's face was a mask of fury, but she raised her hands, her smile cold. "You're clever, Miss Marple, but the game isn't over." As Reed led her away, Miss Marple opened the box, using a hairpin to pick the lock, a trick learned from a long-ago maid. Inside was a single document, yellowed with age, detailing the location of the Ashford treasure, a cache of jewels hidden beneath the chapel's altar. But more intriguing was a name scrawled in the margin. Volume. The rest was smudged, but Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Irina's connection to the Ashfords was no coincidence. The next day, as the village buzzed with news of Irina's arrest, Miss Marple sat with Colin and Lady Beatrice, the document before them. "The treasure is yours to find," she told them. "But be wary. The Countess has allies, and they may not give up so easily." Colin nodded, his face resolute. "Thank you, Miss Marple. We'll protect what's ours." As she returned to her cottage, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Irina. The Countess's parting words echoed in her mind. "The game isn't over." Jane smiled faintly, her knitting needles resuming their steady rhythm. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, there was always another mystery waiting. Chapter 5. The Echoes of Secrets. The frost had thickened over St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a crystalline hush. Miss Jane Marple stood at her garden gate, her scarf tucked tightly against the chill, her eyes fixed on the distant spire of the old chapel. The discovery of the document in the iron box had set the village ablaze with speculation. The Ashford treasure, long thought a myth, was real, a cache of jewels hidden beneath the chapel's altar. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts were not on the treasure itself, but on the smudged name in the document's margin. Volume. It pointed to Countess Irina Volkov, now in custody, but also to a deeper, more tangled web. Irina's parting words at her arrest, "The game isn't over," rang in Jane's ears like a warning bell. The Morning Post brought a letter from Mrs. Bantry, who had taken to her role as Miss Marple's confidante with gusto. "Jane, the letter read, you must come to the manor at once. Colin's found something in the chapel, and he's in a state. Hurry." Miss Marple folded the letter, her lips pursed. Colin's nervous disposition was no match for the weight of family secrets, and she suspected whatever he'd found would complicate matters further. She arrived at Ashford Manor to find Colin pacing the drawing-room, his face ashen. Lady Beatrice sat by the fire, her hands clasped tightly, while Mrs. Bantry hovered nearby, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Miss Marple, thank goodness," Colin said, his voice unsteady. "It's the chapel. I went to check the altar, like the document said, and there's a door, a hidden door. But it's locked, and there's someone watching the place." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Watching? Describe them, Colin." He swallowed hard. "I didn't see much. A figure in a hooded coat near the trees. They vanished when I called out. But I swear, Miss Marple, it felt wrong." She nodded, her mind already turning. "Show me this door, dear boy. And Dolly, fetch your coat. We may need your sharp eyes." The chapel was colder than the morning air, its stones radiating a damp chill. Colin led them to the altar, a slab of weathered granite etched with faint carvings. He knelt, pressing a corner, and a low groan echoed as a section of the floor slid back, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene. "Well done, Colin. Now let's see what lies below." Mrs. Bantry produced a flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. The stairs were steep, the air growing mustier with each step. At the bottom they found a small chamber, its walls lined with ancient oak panels. In the center stood a stone pedestal, empty save for a single, tarnished silver ring, engraved with the same double-headed eagle from the threatening letter. Miss Marple picked it up, her fingers tracing the design. "This is no ordinary trinket," she murmured. "It's a key or a clue." Colin's voice trembled. "But where's the treasure?" "The document said it was here." "Patience," Miss Marple said, her eyes scanning the chamber. One panel caught her attention, its edges slightly misaligned. She pressed it, and it clicked open, revealing a hollow space. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle but intact. She opened it carefully, her breath catching at the first line. "The Volkov Legacy," recorded by Anastasia Ashford, 1855. Mrs. Bantry gasped. "Anastasia? That's Beatrice's great-grandmother." "But Volkov? Could Irina be family?" Miss Marple's lips twitched. "It's possible, Dolly. Let's take this back to the manor. We need light and time to unravel this." In the manor's library, Miss Marple pored over the journal, its pages a tapestry of family secrets. Anastasia Ashford, it seemed, had married a Russian nobleman, Nikolai Volkov, against her family's wishes. Their union was brief, ending in his mysterious death, but not before they hid a fortune in jewels stolen from a Russian prince during a diplomatic scandal. The journal hinted at a curse, a warning that the treasure brought ruin to those who sought it. The final entry was chilling. "The eagle guards the truth, but its shadow brings death." Miss Marple closed the journal, her mind racing. Irina's involvement was no coincidence. She was likely a descendant of Nikolai, seeking to reclaim her family's lost wealth. But the hooded figure Colin had seen suggested others were after the same prize. And the ring, with its eagle motif, was likely the key to the final hiding place. A sudden crash from the hall startled them. Colin bolted to the door, only to find a window shattered, a brick lying among the glass. Tied to it was a note in the same florid script as the threatening letter. "The ring or the manor burns. Midnight, the old oak." Mrs. Bantry clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, this is madness. We can't give in to them." "We won't," Miss Marple said firmly. "But we must be clever. Constable Reed must be informed, but discreetly. And we need a plan." That evening, Miss Marple gathered Colin, Lady Beatrice, and Mrs. Bantry in the library. "We'll give them the ring," she said, holding up the silver band. "Or rather a ring. Dolly, do you still have that old costume jewelry from your theatrical days?" Mrs. Bantry grinned. "You're a devil, Jane. I have just the gaudy silver ring that looks the part." Miss Marple nodded. "Good. We'll place it at the old oak, under watch. Constable Reed and his men will hide nearby. If Irina's associates come, we'll have them." Colin frowned. "But what about the real ring and the treasure?" "The ring stays with me," Miss Marple said, slipping it into her reticule. "As for the treasure, I suspect it's closer than we think." The journal mentioned the eagle's shadow. "I have an idea about that." At midnight the old oak stood sentinel in a clearing near the manor, its branches gnarled and bare. Constable Reed and 2 officers crouched in the underbrush, their breath visible in the cold air. Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry watched from a distance, hidden behind a low wall. The fake ring, wrapped in cloth, lay at the tree's base, glinting faintly in the moonlight. A figure emerged from the shadows, hooded and silent. They knelt, unwrapping the ring, then froze as Reed's voice rang out. Police! Hands up! The figure bolted, but the officers were swift, tackling them to the ground. The hood fell back, revealing not Irina, but a man with a scarred cheek, the same man Miss Marple had seen at the Black Swan Inn. Dmitri, she murmured, recognizing the name from Irina's conversation. As Reed cuffed him, Miss Marple approached, her eyes sharp. "Where is the Countess, sir?" Dmitri's lip curled. "Gone. You'll never find her, but the treasure's cursed, you'll see." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "Curses are often just stories, Mr. Dmitri, but greed is real, and it's brought you low." Back at the manor, Miss Marple returned to the journal, her mind fixed on the phrase the eagle's shadow. She asked Lady Beatrice to show her the family's collection of portraits, focusing on one of Anastasia Ashford, painted in 1855. The background depicted the chapel, and above the altar hung a carved eagle, its wings spread. "The shadow," Miss Marple said softly. "It's not a metaphor, it's literal." She returned to the chapel at dawn, alone but for Coleman, who insisted on joining her. In the pale light, she stood beneath the eagle carving, noting how the rising sun cast its shadow across the altar. The shadow's tip touched a stone, one she hadn't noticed before, etched with a faint eagle. Colin helped her shift it, revealing a small cavity. Inside was a velvet pouch, heavy with the glint of emeralds, sapphires, and diamonds. The Ashford treasure. Colin gasped, but Miss Marple's expression was somber. "This is your family's legacy, Coleman, but also its burden. Guard it well, and trust no one too quickly." As news of the treasure's discovery spread, St. Mary Mead buzzed with excitement. Dmitri was in custody, but Irina remained at large, her whereabouts a mystery. Miss Marple sat in her parlor, the silver ring. On her table, its eagle gleaming. The journal had revealed Irina's lineage. She was indeed a Volkov, descended from Nikolai, her claim to the treasure rooted in blood and betrayal. Mrs. Bantry arrived, breathless with gossip. "Jane, they say Irina's been spotted in London, boarding a train to Paris. Do you think she'll come back?" Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "Oh, I expect she will, Dolly. The Volkovs are tenacious." "But so am I." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the next move in this intricate game. The treasure was safe for now, but Irina's shadow loomed large, and Jane knew the final unmasking was yet to come. Chapter 6. The Trail to Paris. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the floor. Her knitting lay idle, a rare occurrence, as she studied a telegram that had arrived at dawn. It was from her nephew, Raymond West, a writer with a knack for finding himself in curious places. "Aunt Jane," it read, "rumors of a certain countess in Paris, staying at Hotel l'Étoile, Montmartre. Intrigued? Come at once. Raymond." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. Irina Volkov, it seemed, had not vanished into the ether as some in St. Mary Mead hoped. Her flight to Paris was bold, but not unexpected. The Ashford treasure was secure, locked in a bank vault under Constable Reed's watchful eye, but the silver ring, with its double-headed eagle, still in Miss Marple's possession, suggested Irina's ambitions stretched beyond mere jewels. The Volkov legacy, as revealed in Anastasia Ashford's journal, hinted at secrets yet uncovered secrets worth crossing borders to protect or claim. She packed a small valise, her movements precise, and penned a note to Mrs. Bantry. Off to Paris, Dolly. Keep an eye on the manor. I'll wire you soon. By noon she was on a train to London, then a boat train to Dover, her mind as sharp as the sea air. Paris was unfamiliar territory, but human nature, she knew, was the same everywhere, greedy, cunning, and prone to leaving clues. The Hotel Latour was a faded gem in Montmartre, its velvet drapes and gilt mirrors speaking of past grandeur. Miss Marple, dressed in a sensible gray coat and hat, blended effortlessly with the tourists and artists milling about the lobby. Raymond greeted her with a theatrical bow, his eyes twinkling. "Aunt Jane, you're a marvel. Chasing countesses across the channel at your age." "Age, Raymond, is merely a number," she replied, her tone mild, but her gaze sharp. "Now? Tell me about Irina." He led her to a quiet corner, his voice low. "She's been seen here, always with a man, tall, dark hair, speaks with a Russian accent. They're discreet, but I've heard whispers of an auction, something about a lost relic. The hotel staff say she's rented a private suite, and there's a locked case that never leaves her side." Miss Marple's fingers tightened around her reticule, where the eagle ring rested. "A relic, you say? Interesting. I think it's time we paid the Countess a visit." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "You can't just knock on her door, Aunt Jane. She's dangerous." She smiled serenely. "Oh, I shan't knock, dear boy. But hotels have many eyes and ears." That evening, Miss Marple befriended a chambermaid, Marie, with a few kind words and a small tip. Marie, eager to please, revealed that the Countess, registered as Madame Irina Duval, received frequent visitors in her suite, including a man with a scar on his cheek. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Dmitri, Irina's accomplice from the Black Swan Inn, was in custody, so this was someone new. Marie also mentioned a hidden passage behind the suite's fireplace, used by staff to deliver discreet services. "Perfect," Miss Marple murmured, her plan taking shape. Under cover of night, she and Raymond slipped into the passage, a narrow corridor smelling of dust and polish. Through a peephole they glimpsed Irina's suite, lit by a single lamp. The Countess stood by a table, her hair unbound, her face taut with tension. Before her was a small, ornate case, its lid open to reveal a velvet lining, but no contents. A man with dark hair and a scar stood opposite, his voice sharp. "You promised the relic, Irina. The buyers are impatient." "Where is it?" "It's safe," she snapped, her accent thick. "But the old woman Marple, she has the ring. Without it the relic is useless." Miss Marple's breath caught. The ring was indeed a key, but to what? She leaned closer, straining, to hear when Raymond's elbow brushed a loose panel. It creaked, and Irina's head whipped toward the sound. "Who's there?" she called, her hand darting to a drawer. Miss Marple pulled Raymond back, her voice a whisper. Quickly, back to the corridor. They retreated, their footsteps muffled, and emerged in the hotel's basement, hearts pounding. That was close. Raymond gasped. "What now?" "Now," Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. "We set a trap. Irina wants the ring. Let's give her a chance to take it." The next morning, Miss Marple left a note at the hotel desk, addressed to Madame Duval, in her neat hand. "I have what you seek." Meet me at Café des Artistes, 9 p.m. Come alone. J.M. She then enlisted Raymond's help to secure a private room at the café where they could observe without being seen. "You're playing a dangerous game, Aunt Jane," he said, but his grin betrayed his excitement. At 9, the café buzzed with bohemian chatter, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the clink of glasses. Miss Marple sat in the shadows, the eagle ring on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her scarf. Raymond stood by the door, ready to signal if trouble arose. Irina entered, her eyes scanning the room, her movements graceful but predatory. She wore a simple black dress, but her poise marked her as the Countess. Spotting Miss Marple, she approached, her smile cold. "Miss Marple, you surprise me." "And you, Countess, are predictable," Miss Marple replied, her voice calm. "You want the ring. I want answers. Shall we trade?" Irina's eyes narrowed, but she sat, her hands folded. "What do you know of the relic?" "Enough," Miss Marple said. "The Volkov legacy, the Ashford treasure, a relic tied to both. The ring unlocks it, doesn't it? But you've lost the relic itself." Irina's jaw tightened. "You're clever, but you're out of your depth. The relic is a key to power documents, hidden in the treasure, that could ruin families, governments. My family's claim is rightful, but others want it for darker purposes." Miss Marple leaned forward, her gaze steady. "And Dmitri? The man with the scar?" Irina hesitated, then laughed softly. "Not Dmitri. His brother, Alexei. Dmitri was a fool, easily caught. Alexei is less forgiving." Before Miss Marple could press further, a commotion erupted at the café's entrance. Alexei stormed in, his scar livid in the lamplight, a pistol glinting in his hand. "Irina, enough games," he barked. "The ring now." The café fell. Silent, patrons freezing in fear. Miss Marple's hand closed around her umbrella, but Raymond was faster. He tackled Alexei from behind, sending the pistol skittering across the floor. Irina bolted, but Miss Marple was ready, tripping her with a deft flick of her umbrella. "Not so fast, my dear," she said. As Raymond and a waiter restrained Alexei, the Paris police arrived swiftly, summoned by a quick-thinking barman. Irina and Alexei were taken into custody, the Countess's face a mask of defiance. Miss Marple handed the ring to the inspector, along with a detailed account of the night's events. "You'll want to search her suite," she advised, "and check the locked case. I suspect it's empty, but the clues it holds may lead to your relic." The next day, Miss Marple and Raymond sat in a quiet café near the Seine, the city's bustle a soothing backdrop. The police had found the case empty, as she predicted, but a hidden compartment revealed a coded letter pointing to a safe deposit box in Geneva. The relic, it seemed, was still out there, its secrets intact. "You're incredible." "Aunt Jane," Raymond said, sipping his coffee. "But what now?" "Irina's locked up, but the relic's still missing." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "For now we return home. The relic may surface or it may not, but secrets have a way of revealing themselves given time." Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple found the village abuzz with her Parisian adventure, thanks to Mrs. Bantry's enthusiastic retelling. The Ashford treasure remained in the bank, its future uncertain, but Colin and Lady Beatrice were grateful. Their faith in their family's legacy restored Dot as Miss Marple settled into her parlor. Her knitting needles resumed their steady rhythm. The eagle ring was gone, but its shadow lingered in her mind, a reminder of Irina's words. The game isn't over. Jane smiled faintly, her thoughts already turning to the next move. In a world of secrets and shadows, she was never without a puzzle to solve. Chapter 7. The Geneva Gambit. The late summer light bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, but Miss Jane Marple's thoughts were far from the tranquil village. Her recent Parisian adventure had left her with a nagging sense of unfinished business. The coded letter found in Countess Irina Volkov's hotel suite pointed to a safe deposit box in Geneva, where the elusive relic tied to the Ashford treasure and the Volkov legacy might be hidden. Irina and her accomplice Alexei were in custody, but Miss Marple knew better than to assume the game was over. The relic, whatever it was, held secrets potent enough to draw dangerous players, and Jane was not one to let a puzzle go unsolved. A letter from her nephew Raymond arrived that morning, urging her to join him in Geneva. "Aunt Jane," he wrote, "the Swiss banks are buzzing with rumors of a mysterious client linked to the Volkov name. I've secured us rooms at the Hotel du Lac. Come quickly, your knack for sniffing out trouble is needed." Miss Marple folded the letter, her lips pursed. Geneva, with its polished banks and discreet alleys, was a fitting stage for Irina's next move or someone else's. She packed her valise, left a note for Mrs. Bantry, and caught the evening train to London, bound for Switzerland. The Hotel du Lac overlooked Lake Geneva, its waters shimmering under a crisp autumn sky. Miss Marple, in her usual gray coat and sensible hat, arrived to find Raymond waiting in the lobby, his rider's curiosity alight. "Aunt Jane, you're here. The city's alive with whispers. The Banque Privée de Genève is where? The action is. A woman matching Irina's description was seen there yesterday, despite her being in a Paris cell." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A double, perhaps, or an ally. Irina is clever. She'd have planned for contingencies. "Tell me, Raymond, what do you know of this bank?" He leaned closer, his voice low. "It's old, exclusive, and tight-lipped. The safe deposit box, number 472, is registered to a Madame V. No one knows more, but there's talk of an auction in 3 days, something about historical documents that could shake certain circles." Miss Marple nodded her mind, already weaving threads. The relic, described by Irina as documents tied to power, was likely in that box. But who was Madame V? A stand-in for Irina or another player entirely? "We need access to the bank," she said, "and I think I know just the person to help." Through Raymond's literary contacts, Miss Marple secured a meeting with Madame Elise Dubois, a retired banker's widow with a penchant for gossip and a lingering influence in Geneva's financial circles. Over tea at a quaint patisserie, Miss Marple's gentle probing elicited a wealth of information. "The Banque Privée is particular," Elise said, her eyes gleaming. "But I know a clerk, young peer, who owes me a favor. He might let slip. Who's been visiting box 472. By evening, Peer, a nervous young man with a habit of adjusting his glasses, met them in a quiet park. "Madame Dubois said you're trustworthy," he whispered. "The box was accessed yesterday by a woman, tall, dark hair, Russian accent. She used a forged pass, but the bank's security is old-fashioned. She got in. Left with nothing, though said. The box was empty." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Empty? Are you certain?" Peer nodded. I checked the log. The box hasn't been touched since, but there's a standing order to alert a private number if anyone inquires about it. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. An empty box suggested the relic had been moved or was never there, but the standing order hinted at a trap set by someone expecting pursuit. She turned to Raymond. We need to find this woman. And we need to know who's watching that box. That night, Miss Marple devised a plan. Using Raymond's charm, they spread a rumor through Geneva's social circles that an Englishwoman, Miss Marple, herself had inquired about box 472 at the bank. If the mysterious Madame V or her associates were listening, they'd take the bait. To ensure discretion, Miss Marple enlisted Madame de Bourgh to arrange a private dinner at her villa, inviting a select group of Geneva's elite, including a known art dealer, Monsieur Lefebvre, rumored to broker more than paintings. The villa was a study in opulence, its chandeliers casting a warm glow over the guests. Miss Marple, in a modest lavender dress, blended into the background, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. Lefebvre, a wiry man with a pencil mustache, was charming but evasive, his conversation circling around rare artifacts and discreet transactions. As the evening wore on, Miss Marple noticed a woman at the edge of the room, tall, dark-haired, with a familiar poise. Not Irina, but close enough to be her shadow. Miss Marple approached, her voice gentle. "Madame, you seem familiar. Have we met in Paris, perhaps?" The woman's eyes flickered, but her smile was smooth. "I think not. I am Natasha Volkov, a collector of rare items." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. "Another Volkov? How?" "Fascinating," she said. "I've heard of a relic tied to a certain family. Documents, perhaps?" Natasha's smile tightened. "You're well informed, madame, but some relics are best left buried." Before Miss Marple could press further, a servant whispered in Natasha's ear, and she excused herself, slipping into the garden. Miss Marple followed, keeping to the shadows. Natasha met a man near a fountain, his face half hidden by a fedora. Their voices were low, but Miss Marple caught fragments. The box was a decoy. The relics in Zurich, auctioned tomorrow. She retreated, her mind whirling. Zurich, not Geneva. The empty box was a ruse, designed to throw off pursuers. But Natasha's presence confirmed the Volkov connection, and the auction suggested a larger network. Miss Marple returned to Raymond, her voice urgent. "We leave for Zurich at dawn, and we must alert the Swiss police discreetly." The train to Zurich was a blur of alpine vistas, but Miss Marple's focus was inward, piecing together the puzzle. Natasha Volkov, likely Irina's sister or cousin, was continuing the chase for the relic. The documents, tied to the Ashford treasure and the Volkov legacy, could indeed ruin families, governments, as Irina had claimed. But who were the buyers, and what was their endgame? In Zurich, Miss Marple and Raymond checked into a modest hotel near the auction house, a grand building on Bahnhofstrasse. Posing as an antiquarian and her assistant, they gained entry to the auction's preview, where rare manuscripts and artifacts were displayed. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the catalogue, stopping at an entry. Private Lot 17, Historical Documents. Provenance unknown. No details, but the secrecy screamed significance dot as they mingled. Miss Marple spotted Natasha, now dressed in emerald silk, speaking to a man with a hawkish face and a German accent. Their conversation was guarded, but Miss Marple's lip-reading caught Volkov papers and midnight transfer. She signaled Raymond, who slipped away to alert the police contact they'd arranged through Madame Dubois. At midnight, Miss Marple positioned herself in an alley behind the auction house, her umbrella a comforting weight. Raymond, ever the reluctant hero, stood watch nearby. A black car pulled up and Natasha emerged, carrying a slim case. The hawk-faced man joined her, his hand on a concealed weapon. Before they could exchange the case, police lights flashed and officers swarmed the alley. Natasha dropped the case, her face pale, but the man drew his weapon, only to be tackled by a burly officer. Miss Marple stepped forward, picking up the case. Inside were documents written in Cyrillic and English detailing a 19th-century conspiracy involving the Ashfords and Volkovs, a plot to manipulate European alliances through blackmail. The relic was no mere artifact, but a ledger of secrets, potent enough to destabilize modern powers if exposed. Natasha glared at Miss Marple as she was cuffed. "You're relentless, old woman." "And you're careless, my dear, miss." Marple replied, her smile serene. "Secrets are heavy burdens. Better they're in safe hands." The documents were handed to the Swiss authorities, who promised to secure them in a classified archive. Natasha was detained. Her connection to Irina confirmed she was her younger sister, driven by the same ambition to reclaim the Volkov legacy. Miss Marple and Raymond returned to Geneva, then home to St. Mary Mead, where the village greeted her with awe and a touch of fear. Mrs. Bantry, over tea, demanded every detail. "Jane, you've outdone yourself." Paris, Geneva, Zurich chasing, countesses and conspiracies. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "It's merely observation, Dolly. People are much the same, whether in a village or a city. They want, they scheme, and they forget to look over their shoulder." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the Volkov sisters. Irina and Natasha were contained, but the ledger's secrets hinted at others who might still seek them. The game, as Irina had said, was not over. But for now St. Mary Mead was quiet, and Miss Marple was content to let the next mystery find her. Chapter 8. The Masquerade of Motives. The late autumn of 1925 cast a golden veil over St. Mary Mead, with leaves drifting like embers across the village lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlor window, her knitting needles clicking in a rhythm as steady as her thoughts, though her mind was far from the tranquil scene outside. The theft of Lady Ashford's emerald brooch had spiraled into a web of intrigue, with Countess Irina Volkov at its center. The confrontation at the old mill had unmasked Irina's role in the theft, but her escape, along with her mysterious accomplice Victor and a cloaked figure, left unanswered questions. The map found in Ashford Manor's library, pointing to a hidden treasure, and the silver locket with the Ashford crest, suggested a deeper plot, one that reached beyond a single jewel. Miss Marple's sharp eyes, undimmed by age, flickered with anticipation. The Countess was still out there, and Jane was determined to unravel the truth. A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her face flushed with excitement, clutching a folded newspaper. "Jane, you must see this," she explained, thrusting the paper forward. "It's from London, a society column mentioning a grand masquerade ball at the Duke of Haverford's townhouse tonight. And guess who's rumored to be attending? A certain Russian countess." Miss Marple's lips twitched as she scanned. The article. The Haverford Ball was a glittering affair, attended by the elite of London and beyond. Irina's presence, so soon after her flight from St. Mary Mead, was bold, too bold, perhaps. A masquerade, Jane murmured, the perfect place to hide in plain sight. Dolly, do you still have your invitation to Haverford's events? Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. You're not suggesting we go? It's terribly exclusive, Jane, and oh, you're brilliant. I'll telephone Arthur. He's owed a favor by the Duke's secretary. By noon, arrangements were made. Miss Marple packed a modest valise, selecting a simple black gown and a lace mask from her niece's old theatrical trunk. The train, too. London was a blur of countryside, but Jane's mind was sharp, piecing together the clues, the map, the locket, Irina's cryptic words at the mill. The brooch was only the beginning. The Countess was after something greater, and the Haverford Ball, with its mix of power and secrecy, was the ideal stage for her next move. The Duke of Haverford's townhouse in Mayfair was a vision of opulence, its chandeliers casting a warm glow over masked figures swirling through the ballroom. Miss Marple, her black gown blending with the crowd, moved with the quiet grace of a shadow, her lace mask concealing all but her piercing eyes. Mrs. Bantry, resplendent in emerald silk, and a feathered mask hovered nearby, her excitement barely contained. Jane, this is thrilling, she whispered, like something out of a novel. Hush, Dolly, Miss Marple replied, her voice low. Keep your eyes on the crowd. Look for a woman with Irina's poise tall, commanding, likely in red or black. The ballroom was a kaleidoscope of silk and satin, laughter mingling with the strains of a waltz. Miss Marple's gaze darted from one guest to another, noting a man in a silver domino mask, his movements too precise, and a woman in crimson, her laughter bright but her eyes sharp. It was her Irina Volkov, unmistakable despite the mask. She was speaking to a man in a velvet cloak, his voice low and accented, not Victor but someone new. Their conversation was brief, and they slipped through a side door into a private corridor. Miss Marple followed, her soft-soled shoes silent. On the marble floor, Mrs. Bantry trailed behind, her enthusiasm tempered by Jane's warning glance. The corridor led to a small library, its shelves lined with leather-bound tomes. Irina and the man stood by a fireplace, their voices hushed but urgent. The map is useless without the key, Irina said, her tone sharp. You promised it would be here tonight. The man's voice was smooth, almost mocking. Patience, Countess. The key is with Lord Haverford's collection, but it's guarded. We need a distraction. Miss Marple's heart quickened. A key perhaps tied to the locket or the map's cryptic symbols. She pressed herself against the wall, hidden by a velvet curtain, as Irina's voice grew colder. No more delays, Sergei. The order expects results. If we don't secure the cash, our buyer will turn to Petrov. The name Petrov sent a jolt through Miss Marple. A new player, likely the cloaked figure from the mill, orchestrating from the shadows. She made a mental note, her mind already racing to connect the dots. As Irina and Sergei moved toward a staircase, Miss Marple signaled Mrs. Bantry to stay. Put and followed, her steps light but purposeful. The staircase led to an upper gallery, where a glass case displayed an array of artifacts, jewels, medals, and a small ornate key, its head shaped like an eagle. Irina's eyes locked onto the key, but before she could act, a commotion erupted below. A guest, clearly inebriated, had knocked over a table, drawing the attention of the guards. Sergei seized the moment, smashing the case with a concealed tool. Irina grabbed the key, but Miss Marple, with surprising agility, stepped forward, her umbrella tapping the floor. "Countess, that's not yours to take." Irina spun, her mask slipping to reveal a flash of fury. "You again, old woman, you're meddling in dangerous affairs." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "Dangerous, perhaps, but theft is rather common. Shall we call the guards?" Sergei lunged, but Mrs. Bantry, defying her instructions, burst in, brandishing a champagne bottle. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice trembling but resolute. The distraction gave Miss Marple time to slip the key from Irina's grasp, her fingers deft despite her age. Irina cursed, shoving past them, and fled with Sergei down a back staircase. Miss Marple clutched the key, her heart pounding, but her mind clear. "Dolly, fetch the Duke's steward. Tell him there's been an incident." The steward, a doorman named Mr. Grayson, arrived swiftly, his face pale at the sight of the broken case. Miss Marple handed him the key, explaining only that it had been targeted by thieves. "It's tied to the Ashford estate," she said. "You'll want to secure it and inform the authorities." Back in the ballroom, the mood had shifted. Whispers of the incident spreading like wildfire. Mrs. Bantry, flushed with triumph, clung to Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, you were magnificent, but what's that key for?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "It unlocks something on the Ashford estate. I suspect a vault, perhaps tied to the map. We must return to St. Mary Mead at once." The train back to the village was quiet, giving Miss Marple time to think. The key, now in her reticule, was heavier than it looked, its eagle head intricately carved. The mention of the Order and Petrov suggested a larger conspiracy, one that stretched beyond Irina's ambitions. The Ashford treasure, hinted at in the map, was likely more than Jules' documents, perhaps, or artifacts that held power in the wrong hands. At Ashford Manor, Miss Marple met with Colin and Lady Beatrice, who were shaken by the news of Irina's boldness. "A key?" Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "Could it be for the old family vault?" "It's in the chapel, sealed since my grandfather's time." Colin led them to the chapel, its stones cool and damp in the morning light. The vault was hidden behind a false wall, its lock bearing an eagle motif that matched the key. Miss Marple inserted it, and the door groaned open, revealing a small chamber. Inside was a wooden chest, its lid carved with the Ashford and Volkov crests entwined. She opened it, revealing a collection of letters, a ruby-encrusted dagger, and a small journal. The journal, in Anastasia Ashford's hand, detailed a pact between her and Nikolai Volkov to hide a fortune stolen from a Russian prince during the Crimean War. But one entry stood out. "Charles betrayed us, selling Nikolai's secrets to the highest bidder. The Order of the Eagle protects the truth, but at a cost. The dagger is the final proof, stained with guilt." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Charles Ashford, your ancestor Beatrice. He was no mere bystander. The dagger, perhaps its evidence of a crime?" Colin's face paled. "A crime? You mean murder?" Before Miss Marple could answer, a shadow moved at the chapel's entrance. A man, tall and broad, stepped forward, his face scarred and his voice cold. "You've gone too far, Miss Marple." It was Petrov, the cloaked figure from the mill. His presence chilling Dot, Mrs. Bantry gasped, but Miss Marple's voice was steady. "Mr. Petrov, I presume? You're late to the game." He laughed, a harsh sound. "The dagger is mine. Hand it over, or the manor burns." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Colin, who nodded subtly. He had alerted Constable Reed before entering the chapel, a precaution Jane had insisted on. She held up the dagger, its ruby glinting. "This, I suppose? A curious choice for a man of your profession." Petrov stepped closer, but before he could act, Reed and his men burst in, their lanterns casting stark shadows. "You're under arrest," Reed barked, tackling Petrov as he lunged for the dagger. Irina, who had been hiding in the shadows, bolted for the door, but Mrs. Bantry, with surprising courage, tripped her with a garden rake left by the entrance. As Reed cuffed the pair, Miss Marple handed him the journal and dagger. "These belong with the authorities, Constable. They tell a story of betrayal that ends today." The next day, Miss Marple sat with Inspector Hargreaves, who had arrived from London. The journal and dagger confirmed Charles Ashford's role in Nikolai's death, a scandal that would remain buried to protect the living. Irina and Petrov were in custody, their Order of the Eagle exposed as a network of opportunists trading in historical secrets. Hargreaves shook his head, half amused. "Miss Marple, you've turned a village theft into an international conspiracy. What's next?" She smiled faintly. "I merely observe, Inspector. The world is full of stories waiting to be heard." Back in her cottage, Mrs. Bantry arrived, brimming with excitement. "Jane, you're a marvel. A dagger, a vault, a secret order. What will you do now?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Knit, Dolly, and listen. The eagle's shadow is gone, but St. Mary Mead always has a tale to tell." As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the village, Miss Marple's thoughts settled. The Volk of Ashford saga was unraveling, but the world was never silent, and her sharp eyes were ready for the next whisper of mystery. Chapter 9. The Whisper of the Past. The first snow of the season dusted St. Mary Mead, softening the village's edges and muffling its sounds. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlor fire, her knitting needles paused as she studied a small, tarnished locket that had arrived in the Morning Post. It bore no note, only the faint engraving of a double-headed eagle, the Volkov crest. The locket's clasp was stiff, but inside she found a tiny photograph, faded but clear, a young woman with Irina Volkov's sharp features, standing beside a man in a military uniform, their expressions solemn. On the back, in spidery script, was a date, 1855. Miss Marple's heart quickened. This was no mere keepsake. It was a message, a thread tying the present to the past. Her recent triumph in London, unmasking the silent auction and its players Irina's. Cousin Lena and the financier Klaus Werner had secured the Volkov ledger and the eagle ring in a Swiss archive. Yet the locket's arrival suggested the Volkov saga was far from over. The anonymous sender knew her address, her role in the affair, and perhaps more. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Someone was still playing the game, and she was not one to ignore a challenge. A knock at the door announced Mrs. Bantry, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Jane, you've got that look again," she said, shedding her coat. "What's happened now?" Miss Marple held up the locket. "This arrived today, Dolly. No sender, but it's Volkov, through and through. I suspect our Countess or her allies are not done with us." Mrs. Bantry gasped, peering at the photograph. "That's eerie. It's like Irina, but older." "What does it mean?" "It means," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm, "that we must look to the past to understand the present. I'm going to London, Dolly. There's someone I need to see." By evening, Miss Marple was on a train to London, the locket tucked safely in her reticule. Her destination was the British Museum, where her old friend Professor Edmund Lyle, an expert in 19th century European history, might shed light on the photograph. The museum's reading room was a haven of quiet, its domed ceiling looming over scholars bent over ancient texts. Professor Lyle, a wiry man with a shock of white hair, greeted her warmly. "Jane, you always bring the most intriguing puzzles. What's this about a locket?" She showed him the photograph, explaining its Volkov connection and the ledger's secrets. Lyle's eyes lit up as he examined the image. "This is remarkable. The woman resembles Anastasia Ashford, as described in old records, but the man, he's wearing a uniform of the Russian Imperial Guard, circa 1850s. The date, 1855, aligns with the Crimean War. If this is Nikolai Volkov, Anastasia's husband, this locket ties directly to their scandal." Miss Marple nodded. The ledger mentioned a conspiracy blackmail to sway alliances. Could there be more documents hidden elsewhere? Lyle rubbed his chin. Possibly. The Volkovs were rumored to have stashed papers in multiple locations. Insurance against their enemies. There's a reference in an old diplomatic archive to a Volkov cache in Vienna, tied to a safe house used during the war. If you have a lead, Jane, it's worth pursuing." She thanked him, her mind already turning. Vienna, a city of intrigue and old secrets, was a logical next step. But the locket's anonymous delivery suggested someone was watching, perhaps baiting her. She telephoned Raymond, who was thrilled at the prospect of another adventure. "Vienna. Aunt Jane? I'll book us tickets. But are you sure you're up for this?" "Quite sure, dear boy," she replied, her tone serene. "The past has a way of demanding attention." Vienna's streets glittered under a fresh snowfall, the city's Baroque facades a backdrop to Miss Marple's quiet determination. And Raymond checked into a modest hotel near the Stephansdom, blending in with the tourists. Lyle had provided an address from the archives, a narrow townhouse in the inner Stadt, once a Volkov safe house. Miss Marple, dressed in a dark wool coat, approached it with caution, her umbrella a familiar comfort. The townhouse was now a private gallery, its windows displaying antique jewelry and manuscripts. Inside, a young woman with a sharp gaze introduced herself as Frau Clara Weiss, the curator. "You're interested in our collection?" she asked, her English flawless but tinged with suspicion that Miss Marple smiled. "I'm a collector of sorts, my dear. I've heard rumors of Volkov artifacts, documents, perhaps from the 1850s. Clara's expression flickered, but she recovered quickly. "We have no such items, madam, but feel free to browse." As Raymond distracted Clara with questions about a display case, Miss Marple slipped into a back room, her instincts guiding her. A locked cabinet caught her eye, its keyhole bearing a faint eagle motif. She hesitated, then used a hairpin, a trick from her St. Mary Mead days, to pick the lock. Inside was a small box, identical to the one from the Ashford chapel, containing a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The topmost letter, in Anastasia's hand, read, "To my heirs beware the eagle's claws. The truth lies in the vault, but its price is blood." A creak behind her made Miss Marple turn. Clara stood in the doorway, her face pale. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling. "They'll kill you for this." "They?" Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle but unyielding. "Who, my dear?" Clara glanced nervously behind her. "The Order. They guard the Volkov secrets. They sent the locket to lure you here." Before Miss Marple could press further, a shadow moved in the hall, a man, broad-shouldered, with a scar across his brow. Not Alexei or Dmitri, but another of Irina's ilk. Miss Marple clutched the letters, her heart steady. "Raymond! Raymond!" she called, and her nephew appeared, brandishing a heavy candlestick from the gallery. The man lunged, but Raymond swung, knocking him back. Clara screamed, and Miss Marple seized the moment, grabbing Raymond's arm and pulling him toward the door. They fled into the snowy streets, the letters tucked into her coat. Behind them the man shouted in Russian, his words lost in the wind. At the hotel, Miss Marple and Raymond examined the letters. They were coded, but the references to a vault and a final key suggested another hiding place, likely in Vienna. One letter mentioned a crypt beneath the Kapuzener Kirche, the imperial crypt where Habsburg emperors rested. "The eagle's claws," Miss Marple murmured. "A reference to the crypt's guardians, perhaps." Raymond looked skeptical. "A crypt? Aunt Jane, this is getting dangerous." "Danger, dear boy, is merely truth in a hurry," she replied, her eyes gleaming. She contacted the Viennese police through a British embassy friend, requesting discreet surveillance at the crypt. That night they approached the Kapuzener Kirche, its stone facade looming in the moonlight. The crypt's entrance was guarded, but Miss Marple's embassy contact had arranged access. Inside, the air was cold and heavy, the silence broken only by their footsteps. Miss Marple's flashlight traced the sarcophagi, stopping at one adorned with an eagle carving. She pressed a panel, and it clicked open, revealing a hollow space. Inside was a single document, sealed with the Volkov crest. Before she could open it, footsteps echoed a group of men, led by the scarred man from the gallery. "You're persistent, old woman," he growled, his accent thick. "But this ends here." Miss Marple stepped back, her voice calm. "I think not, sir. The police are already here." As if on cue, officers flooded the crypt, their shouts drowning the man's curses. The group was apprehended, revealed as members of a shadowy group called the Order of the Eagle, dedicated to protecting or exploiting the Volkov secrets. The document, when opened, was a final confession from Nikolai Volkov, detailing the conspiracy's full scope, names, dates, and deals that could still destabilize fragile alliances. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Bantry, the locket and letters before her. The Order was under investigation, its members scattered, but the Volkov legacy lingered. "Jane, you've outdone yourself," Dolly said, awestruck. "Vienna, crypts, secret orders." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "It's just human nature, Dolly. Greed and secrets, always leaving tracks." As the snow fell outside, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Irina, still in custody, and the Order's reach. The game was quieter now, but not over. She smiled faintly. Chapter 10. The final key. The snow fell steadily over St. Mary Mead, blanketing the village in a serene silence that belied the storm brewing in Miss Jane Marple's mind. The locket, the letters, and the confession from the Viennese crypt had unraveled much of the Volkov legacy, exposing the Order of the Eagle and their designs on a cache of secrets that could destabilize nations. Yet, as Miss Marple sat by her parlor fire, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, she sensed the puzzle was incomplete. The final document from the crypt, penned by Nikolai Volkov, hinted at one last hiding place, a final key that would unlock the true heart of the Volkov-Ashford conspiracy. The Order's members were in custody, but their leader, the elusive Petrov mentioned in the whispering vault, remained at large, a shadow pulling strings from afar. A telegram arrived at noon, its urgency cutting through the quiet morning. It was from Inspector Hargreaves, now coordinating with Interpol from London. Miss Marple, urgent. Petrov sighted in Budapest. Suspected link to Volkov cache. Meet me at Hotel Gellert tomorrow. Bring any clues. Hargreaves. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Budapest, a city steeped in history and intrigue, was a fitting stage for the final act. She packed her valise, left a note for Mrs. Bantry. Off to Budapest, Dolly. Mind the village. Gossip. And caught the evening train to London, bound for the continent. The Hotel Gellert, with its Art Nouveau grandeur, overlooked the Danube, its waters glinting under a pale winter sun. Miss Marple arrived to find Inspector Hargreaves. Waiting in the lobby, his face etched with fatigue, but his eyes sharp. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple," he said, shaking her hand. "Petrov's slippery, but we've got a lead. He's meeting someone tonight at the Fisherman's Bastion, a handover of sorts. We think it's tied to the final key you mentioned." "Mentioned?" Miss Marple nodded, producing the locket in Nikolai's confession. "This key, Inspector, is likely not a physical object, but a code or location. The confession spoke of the heart of the Eagle, where the river bends. The Danube has many bends, but Budapest's history suggests a specific site." Hargreaves raised an eyebrow. "You've done your homework. The bastion's near a bend in the river, and it's a known spot for discreet meetings. But Petrov's dangerous ex-KGB, now a freelance broker of secrets? We'll have men in place, but I'd rather you stayed safe." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "I'll be discreet, Inspector, but I've a knack for noticing things others miss." That evening, Miss Marple and Hargreaves positioned themselves at the Fisherman's Bastion, its fairy-tale turrets glowing in the moonlight. She wore a dark cloak borrowed from the hotel, blending into the shadows, while Hargreaves coordinated with his team via a discreet earpiece. The air was crisp, the city's lights reflecting off the Danube below. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the crowd, tourists snapping photos, couples strolling, until she spotted a man in a long gray coat, his movements too deliberate to be casual. His face was obscured, but a faint scar on his jaw matched descriptions. Of Petrov, he approached a woman, petite and blonde, her face hidden by a scarf. Their exchange was brief. A small package passed from her hand to his. Miss Marple whispered to Hargreaves, "That's our moment. The package is likely the key." Before Hargreaves could signal his men, a second figure emerged from the shadows, a woman with Irina Volkov's unmistakable poise. Miss Marple's breath caught. Irina, freed or escaped, was here. She moved toward Petrov, her voice low but urgent. "You promised me the ledger's copy, Petrov. Where is it?" Petrov's laugh was cold. "Patience, Countess. The key first, then the prize." Miss Marple's mind raced. The package, the final key, was likely a cipher or map to the ledger's duplicate, hidden separately to ensure the order's survival. She tugged Hargreaves' sleeve. "We must act now before they vanish." Hargreaves nodded, signaling his team. The bastion erupted in controlled chaos as officers closed in. Petrov bolted, but Irina was faster, slipping into the crowd. Miss Marple, with surprising agility, followed, her umbrella tapping the stone path. She tracked Irina to a narrow staircase leading to the riverbank, where a small boat waited. "Countess," Miss Marple called, her voice cutting through the night. "You can't run forever." Irina turned, her eyes blazing. "You're a pest, Miss Marple, but you're too late. The key is gone, and the secrets will be mine." Miss Marple stepped closer, her tone calm. "Secrets are heavy, my dear, and you've carried them alone too long. Tell me where the ledger's copy is, and perhaps you'll find peace." Irina hesitated, her resolve wavering. Before she could respond, Hargreaves' men appeared, cuffing her as she cursed in Russian. The boat was searched, revealing nothing, but Petrov, caught near the chain bridge, still clutched the package, a small metal cylinder engraved with an eagle. Inside was a slip of paper with coordinates and a cipher 47.4979N. 19.0402E. Beneath the eagle's heart, the truth sleeps. The coordinates led to a forgotten chapel on Castle Hill, its crypt sealed since the 19th century. With Hargreaves' team and a local historian, Miss Marple entered the crypt, its air thick with dust and time. A stone sarcophagus, carved with an eagle, stood at the center. The historian, a nervous man named Dr. Kovacs, confirmed its significance. This was a Volkov hideout during the 1848 revolution, a perfect place for secrets. Using the cipher from the cylinder, Miss Marple decoded a sequence of carvings on the sarcophagus, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a leather-bound book, a duplicate of the Volkov ledger, its pages detailing the same conspiracy's names, dates, and deals that could still append modern alliances. But a final note in Nikolai's hand struck her. "To my heirs let this truth die with me. The eagle's heart is a curse, not a crown." Hargreaves secured the ledger, his face grim. "This could start wars, Miss Marple." "It's going to. A vault no one will touch," she nodded. "Some secrets are best buried, Inspector, but people like Petrov and Irina will always seek them." Back in St. Mary Mead, the village buzzed with rumors of Miss Marple's Budapest adventure, fueled by Mrs. Bantry's gleeful retelling. Over tea, Dolly pressed for details. "Jane, crypts, ciphers, countesses, you're a legend." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Hardly, Dolly. I simply listen when the past whispers. People forget how loud silence can be." As the snow fell outside, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Irina, now facing trial, and Petrov, whose network was crumbling under Interpol's scrutiny. The Volkov legacy was silenced, its secrets locked away, but Jane knew human nature too well to believe the game was truly over. She smiled faintly, her eyes bright with the anticipation of the next mystery, waiting just beyond the horizon. Chapter 11. The Echo of the Eagle. The winter deepened in St. Mary Mead. cloaking the village in a hush broken only by the occasional crackle of a fire or the distant toll of church bells. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles, moving with their steady rhythm, but her thoughts were restless. The Budapest affair had closed a significant chapter of the Volkov saga. Irina Volkov was in custody, the duplicate ledger secured, and Petrov's network was unraveling under Interpol's relentless pursuit. Yet the locket with its 1855 photograph of Anastasia Ashford and Nikolai Volkov remained on her tea table, a quiet reminder that some secrets refuse to stay buried. Nikolai's final note in the ledger, "The eagle's heart is a curse, not a crown," echoed in her mind, suggesting one last piece of the puzzle waited to be uncovered. A letter arrived that morning, its envelope plain but its contents electrifying. Written in a careful, unfamiliar hand, it read, "Miss Marple, the eagle's heart beats still. Seek the shadow in the Ashford crypt. Midnight, St. Agnes Day. Come alone." No signature, no seal, but the mention of the Ashford crypt, a place Miss Marple had not revisited since the Whispering Vault, stirred her instincts. St. Agnes Day was tomorrow, January 21st, and the anonymity of the note suggested either a trap or a desperate plea. Either way, Miss Marple was not one to ignore a summons. She telephoned Mrs. Bantry, who arrived within the hour, her eyes alight with curiosity. "Jane? Another adventure? You've barely recovered from Budapest." Miss Marple's smile was faint. "The past is persistent, Dolly. I need you to do something for me discreetly. Alert Constable Reed to be near the Ashford crypt tomorrow night, but tell him to stay hidden unless I signal." Mrs. Bantry's jaw dropped. "The crypt? Jane, you're not going alone, are you?" "I must," Miss Marple said firmly. "But I'll be prepared. Now let's visit the manor. I need to speak with Colin and Lady Beatrice." At Ashford Manor, the air was heavy with unease. Colin, still shaken by the recent threats, greeted Miss Marple with a mix of relief and apprehension. Lady Beatrice, frail but resolute, clutched a cup of tea as she listened to Miss Marple's account of the letter. "The crypt again?" Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "After all this, what more could they want?" Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Not the treasure, I think, but something personal. The locket suggests a family secret, one Anastasia and Nikolai hid even from their heirs. Tell me, Beatrice, is there anything in the crypt we might have missed?" Colin frowned. "We searched it thoroughly after the vault, but there's a family legend about a hidden niche behind the main tomb. I always thought it was nonsense." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "Legends have a way of holding truth, Colin. Let's explore this niche tomorrow before the appointed hour." The night of St. Agnes Day was bitter, the sky a tapestry of stars above the snow-dusted Ashford estate. Miss Marple, wrapped in a heavy shawl and clutching her umbrella, approached the crypt alone, her flashlight casting a narrow beam. The crypt's iron gate creaked. As she entered, the air inside thick with the scent of ancient stone. She found the main tomb, a massive marble structure bearing the Ashford crest, and ran her fingers along its base, searching for the hidden niche Colin had mentioned. A faint seam caught her attention, and she pressed it, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a velvet pouch containing a single item, a gold medallion, engraved with a double-headed eagle and a cryptic inscription in Cyrillic. A rustle behind her made her turn, her heart steady despite the darkness. A figure stepped into the moonlight, filtering through a broken window. A woman, slight and gray-haired, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp. "You're Miss Marple," she said, her accent faint, but distinctly Russian. "I knew you'd—" "Come." Miss Marple's grip tightened on her umbrella. "And you are?" "Elena Volkov," the woman said, stepping closer. "Nikolai's sister. The locket was mine, sent to draw you here. The medallion is the final key, the heart of the eagle." Miss Marple's mind raced. Elena, the unmentioned Volkov, a shadow from the past. "What does it unlock, Elena?" The woman's smile was bitter. "Redemption. The medallion opens a safe in Moscow, holding proof of Nikolai's innocence. Anastasia's confession was a lie. She killed him to protect her family, but he was no traitor. I've spent my life guarding this truth." Miss Marple studied the medallion, its weight heavy in her hand. "Why now? Why me?" "You've dismantled the order," Elena said. "You're the only one I trust to finish this. The safe is in a private vault, owned by Petrov. He seeks to bury the truth forever." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Petrov? As in Budapest, under watch?" Elena shook her head. "He escaped days ago. He's in Moscow now, planning to destroy the evidence. You must stop him." A sudden noise of footstep cut through the silence. Miss Marple spun, her flashlight catching a man's silhouette in the doorway. Petrov, his scar unmistakable, held a pistol. "You're too late, old woman," he growled. "Hand it over." Miss Marple's voice was calm. "You're a fool. Petrov, secrets don't die so easily." He laughed, stepping closer, but a shout from outside, "Police!" made him freeze. Constable Reed's men stormed in, their torches blazing. Petrov fired wildly, but the officers were swift, disarming him as Elena shrank back. Miss Marple slipped the medallion into her reticule, her expression serene. The next morning, Miss Marple sat with Inspector Hargreaves in a London hotel, the medallion on the table. Elena, now in protective custody, had provided details of the Moscow vault. "We'll handle it from here," Hargreaves said. "The evidence will clear Nikolai's name if it's real." "It's real," Miss Marple said softly. "The Volkovs carried their truth too long." Back in St. Mary Mead, Mrs. Bantry arrived, breathless with questions. "Jane, Moscow? A hidden safe? You're unstoppable." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Not unstoppable, Dolly, just persistent. The past always finds a way to speak." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Elena, the last Volkov, and the medallion's promise of redemption. The eagle's heart was silent now, but Jane knew the world was full of whispers, waiting for her to listen. Chapter 12. The last confession. The winter snows had softened in St. Mary Mead, giving way to a tentative thaw that left the village paths slick and glistening. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles moving with their familiar cadence, but her thoughts were far from the quiet rhythms of village life. The events in the Ashford crypt had brought the Volkov saga to a critical juncture. Elena Volkov, Nikolai's sister, had entrusted her with the gold medallion, the final key to a safe in Moscow containing proof of Nikolai's innocence in a 19th century conspiracy. Petrov, the elusive mastermind, was in custody, but Miss Marple's instincts told her the story was not yet complete. The medallion, now in Interpol's hands, was a beacon to secrets still hidden, and Jane knew the past had one last confession to make. A letter arrived that morning, its envelope bearing a Moscow postmark and a faint trace of lavender scent. The handwriting was Alana's, precise and elegant. "Miss Marple, the safe is opened, but the truth is incomplete. A final letter remains hidden in St. Mary Mead, where the Eagle first landed. Find it before they do. E." The cryptic reference to where the Eagle first landed stirred Miss Marple's memory. The Volkov-Ashford connection began with Anastasia and Nikolai's arrival in the village in 1855, at the old vicarage, now a crumbling ruin, on the edge of the estate. Could the letter be there? Mrs. Bantry burst in, her scarf askew. "Jane, you're plotting again. What's this about Moscow and another letter?" Miss Marple showed her the note, her voice calm. "The past is calling, Dolly. I need to visit the old vicarage." "Will you come?" Mrs. Bantry's eyes sparkled. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." The old vicarage stood at the fringe of the Ashford estate, its walls choked with ivy and its windows boarded. Miss Marple, bundled in her gray coat, carried a flashlight and her trusty umbrella, while Mrs. Bantry clutched a thermos of tea for emergencies. Colin Ashford joined them, his curiosity outweighing his nerves. "The vicarage hasn't been touched in years," he said, prying open the door. "What are we looking for?" "A letter," Miss Marple replied, her eyes scanning the dusty interior. "Something Anastasia or Nikolai left behind, where the Eagle first landed." The vicarage was a maze of rotting beams and faded wallpaper, but Miss Marple's attention fixed on the fireplace, its mantel carved with a faint eagle motif. She knelt, running her fingers along the hearthstone, and found a loose brick. With Colin's help, she pried it free, revealing a small tin box, rusted but intact. Inside was a single letter, sealed with the Volkov crest, its wax brittle with age. Mrs. Bantry gasped. "Jane, you're a marvel. What does it say?" Miss Marple broke the seal, her hands steady. The letter, in Anastasia's hand, was a confession. "I lied to protect my family. Nikolai was no traitor, but a patriot, hiding secrets to save his country. I killed him in fear, and the guilt is mine alone. The Eagle's truth lies with the last heir in the house of glass." A postscript added, "Forgive me, Elena." Miss Marple's lips pursed. The house of glass. Not a building, perhaps, but a metaphora conservatory, or a mirror. "The Ashford Manor has a conservatory, doesn't it, Colin?" He nodded, wide-eyed. "It's in disrepair, but yes, could it be there?" At the manor, the conservatory was a skeleton of rusted iron, and cracked panes, its air heavy with damp earth. Lady Beatrice, frail but determined, joined them, clutching the locket Miss Marple had returned. "Anastasia's shame," she murmured. "I never knew." Miss Marple searched the conservatory, her flashlight catching glints of glass. A cracked mirror, half hidden by vines, bore a faint eagle etching. She pressed it, and a panel clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small diary, its pages filled with Nikolai's precise script, a detailed account of his mission to protect Russian secrets from falling into enemy hands during the Crimean War. The final entry named the last heir, Elena Volkov, entrusted with the truth but sworn to silence. Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands. "Jane, you've done it. The last piece." "Not quite," Miss Marple said softly. "Elena knew this existed, but someone else does too." The letter was a warning. As if on cue, a shadow moved outside the conservatory, and a stone shattered a pane of glass. Colin shouted, but Miss Marple was calm, signaling them to stay back. She stepped to the door, her umbrella raised, and called, "Show yourself, please." A man emerged, lean and gray-haired, his face weathered but his eyes sharp. "You're relentless, Miss Marple," he said, his accent faintly Eastern European. "I'm Ivan, Elena's son. The diary is mine by right." Miss Marple's gaze was steady. "Yours, perhaps, but not for destruction." Elena wanted the truth known, not buried. Ivan's jaw tightened. "The order is gone, but others will pay for that diary. It's my family's redemption." Before he could advance, Constable Reed's voice cut through the night. "Police, hands up." His men surrounded Ivan, who surrendered without a fight, his shoulders slumping. Miss Marple handed the diary to Reed, her voice firm. "This belongs." "In safe hands, Constable. Interpol will know what to do." The next day, Miss Marple met with Inspector Hargrave at the manor, the diary now en route to a secure archive. Ivan, revealed as a rogue agent seeking to profit from his family's legacy, was in custody. Elena, contacted in Vienna, confirmed the diary's authenticity, her voice heavy with relief. "You've freed us, Miss Marple," she said over the phone. "The eagle's curse is lifted." Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Bantry, the locket on the table. "Jane, you've outdone yourself," Dolly said, sipping tea. "Moscow, Vienna, Budapest, and now our own backyard. What's next?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Nothing for now, Dolly. The past is spoken, and I've listened. But people will always have secrets, and I'll be here when they whisper." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts settled. The Volkov-Ashford saga was closed, its truths laid bare. Yet the world was full of shadows, and Jane's sharp eyes were ever watchful, ready for the next echo to call her name. Chapter 13. The Silent Echoes. The early spring of 1926 brought a tentative warmth to St. Mary Mead, with crocuses peeking through the thawing earth, and the village stirring from its winter slumber. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting, needles clicking softly, but her mind was far from the tranquil rhythm of her craft. The Volkov-Ashford saga, with its web of secrets spanning St. Mary Mead, Paris, Vienna, Budapest, and Moscow, had concluded with the discovery of Nikolai Volkov's diary in the Ashford Conservatory. The diary, now secured by Interpol, had cleared Nikolai's name, exposing the truth behind Anastasia Ashford's tragic lie. Elena Volkov and her son Ivan were in custody, and the shadowy order of the Eagle was dismantled. Yet Miss Marple's instincts, as keen as ever, whispered that the echoes of the Eagle had not entirely faded. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Colin Ashford, his face pale but resolute, clutching a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low, "this arrived at the manor this morning, addressed to you. No sender, but it feels important." She took the parcel, her fingers tracing the plain string. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed but pristine, and a brief note in an unfamiliar hand. "Miss Marple, the Eagle's shadow lingers. This is the last confession, hidden where the river meets the sea. Guard it well. A keeper." The phrase "where the river meets the sea" sparked a memory. The river Mead, which wound through the village, emptied into the sea, near the coastal town of Dannemouth, a place Miss Marple knew well from childhood summers. The notebook's cover bore a faint eagle embossing. Tying it to the Volkov legacy. Mrs. Bantry, summoned by a quick telephone call, arrived breathless with anticipation. "Jane? Another mystery? You've barely rested since Moscow." Miss Marple's smile was faint. "Rest is for those without curiosity, Dolly. This notebook may be the final piece of the Volkov puzzle. We're going to Dannemouth." The train to Dannemouth rattled along the coast, the sea a shimmering expanse under a pale March sky. Miss Marple, in her sensible gray coat, studied the notebook's pages. It was written in Nikolai Volkov's precise script, a continuation of his diary, detailing a final act of defiance, a list of names, European nobles and diplomats who had profited from the Volkov-Ashford conspiracy. The last page read, "The truth rests where the river meets the sea, in the keeper's care. Let it sleep, lest it wake ruin." In Dannemouth, Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry checked into a small guest-house overlooking the harbor. The town was quiet, its fishing boats bobbing gently, but Miss Marple's attention fixed on the old lighthouse at the river's mouth, a weathered structure known as the Keeper's Light. "The Keeper?" she murmured. "Not a person, perhaps, but a place." They approached the lighthouse at dusk, the air sharp with salt and seaweed. The door was unlocked, a sign of disuse, and the interior was a spiral of dust and shadows. Miss Marple's flashlight swept the walls, landing on a rusted metal plate engraved with an eagle. She pressed it, and a low click echoed as a compartment opened in the stone floor. Inside was a sealed tin, its lid etched with the Volkov crest. Mrs. Bantry gasped. "Jane, you're uncanny. What's inside?" Miss Marple opened the tin, revealing a single documental letter from Nikolai to an unknown ally, dated days before. His death. It confirmed the names in the notebook, accusing them of treason and greed, and entrusted the keeper to hide the truth until the time was right. A small key, shaped like an eagle's claw, lay beside it. "This key," Miss Marple said softly, "unlocks something greater." But where? A sudden creak from the stairs made her turn. A figure stood silhouetted against the fading light. A woman, elderly but upright, her eyes sharp with recognition. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low and accented. "I am Sophia, the last keeper of the eagle. Elena sent me." Miss Marple's grip tightened on her umbrella. "Elena is in custody." "Why are you here?" Sophia stepped closer, her hands raised. "To end it. The key opens a safe in the Dannemouth church, where the final proof lies, a ledger of payments tying the conspiracy to living families. I was to destroy it, but I couldn't. You've earned the right to decide its fate." Before Miss Marple could respond, a shout came from outside. "Police, don't move." Constable Reed, alerted by Mrs. Bantry's earlier call, stormed in with 2 officers. Sophia didn't resist, her expression weary but relieved. "Take it," she said, nodding to the tin. "Let the truth rest." At the Dannemouth church, Miss Marple found the safe behind a false panel in the vestry, the eagle claw key fitting perfectly. Inside was a slim ledger, its pages listing transactions from 1855 to the present, payments to silence those who knew of the Volkov-Ashford plot. Names included distant Ashford cousins and modern European figures, a scandal waiting to erupt. She handed the ledger to Inspector Hargreaves, who arrived by morning train. "This could ruin lives," he said, his face grim. "We'll seal it. In the archives, Miss Marple. No one needs this poison." She nodded. Some truths are better buried, Inspector, but they must be known to someone to prevent their return. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Bantry, the locket and notebook on her table. "Jane, you've saved us all again," Dolly exclaimed. Danimouth, secret ledgers, mysterious keepers. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. Not saved, Dolly just listened. The eagle's echoes are silent now, but the world is never quiet. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts settled. The Volkov legacy was finally at rest, its secrets locked away. Yet she knew human nature too well to believe all shadows were gone. With a faint smile, she knitted on, ready for the next whisper to call her name. Chapter 14. The fading shadow. The spring of 1926 bloomed gently in St. Mary Mead, with daffodils nodding along the village lanes and a soft breeze carrying the scent of new life. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles clicking, with their familiar rhythm, but her thoughts were restless. The discovery of the final Volkov ledger in Danimouth's church had closed a long chapter of intrigue, tying the Ashford and Volkov families to a century-old conspiracy of blackmail and betrayal. The ledger, now locked in Interpol's secure archives, held names that could topple reputations, but Miss Marple had ensured its silence, trusting the authorities to guard it. Sophia, the last keeper of the eagle, was under protection, her role in preserving the truth acknowledged, but her freedom uncertain. Yet as Miss Marple sipped her tea, a faint unease lingered. The Volkov saga felt too neatly resolved, and her instincts whispered of one last shadow waiting to fade. A parcel arrived that afternoon, small and unassuming, wrapped in plain brown paper with a postmark from Edinburgh. Inside was a single sheet of music yellowed with age, titled "The Eagle's Lament," and credited to an anonymous composer. Tucked between the pages was a note in a spidery hand. "Miss Marple, the song holds the final truth. Play it where the eagle rests. The last scribe." No signature, no crest, but the reference to the eagle was unmistakable. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The Ashford estate had no piano in the crypt or conservatory, but the village church, where the Volkov secrets had first surfaced, housed an old organ, its pipes etched with faint eagle motifs from a forgotten donor. Mrs. Bantry arrived, her curiosity as bright as the spring sun. "Jane, another mystery you've barely unpacked from Danimouth." Miss Marple handed her the sheet music. "The past is stubborn, Dolly. This music may be the final piece of the Volkov puzzle. Will you join me at the church tonight?" Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "The church? Jane, you're incorrigible." "Of course I'm coming." The St. Mary Mead church was silent at dusk, its stained glass windows casting muted colors across the pews. Miss Marple, in her gray shawl, approached the organ, its keys worn but polished. The vicar, Mr. Clement, had granted her access. His curiosity piqued, but his trust in Miss Marple absolute. She sat at the organ, the sheet music propped before her, and began to play the Eagle's Lament, a haunting melody, its notes weaving a tale of loss and redemption. Mrs. Bantry stood watch, her thermos of tea forgotten in her excitement. As the final chord echoed, a faint click sounded from the organ's base. Miss Marple knelt, her flashlight revealing a hidden panel, its edges carved with an eagle. Inside was a small velvet pouch containing a single letter, sealed with the Volkov crest. The paper was brittle, but the words were clear, written in Nikolai Volkov's hand. To my sister Elena, the truth is my gift and my curse. The eagle's song hides the names of those who betrayed us, encoded in its notes. Protect them, or destroy them as you see fit. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The music was a cipher, its notes corresponding to letters or numbers. She examined the sheet again, noting irregularities in the notation's subtle markings that suggested a code. "Dolly," she said, "we need an expert, someone who understands music and codes." Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands. "Raymond. He's in London dabbling in those avant-garde music circles. He'll know someone." By morning, Miss Marple was on a train to London, the sheet music and letter in her reticule. Raymond West met her at King's Cross, his writer's enthusiasm undimmed. "Aunt Jane, a musical cipher? This is straight out of a novel. I've got just the person Dr. Clara Henshaw, a musicologist with a sideline in cryptography." "Dr. Henshaw," a brisk woman with a sharp mind, met them at her Bloomsbury flat, surrounded by stacks of sheet music and code-breaking manuals. She studied The Eagle's Lament with growing excitement. "This is extraordinary," she said, her glasses slipping down her nose. "The notes form a polybious square, a classic cipher. Each note corresponds to a letter, spelling out a message. After an hour of careful transcription, the message emerged: traitors, Lord Haversham, Count Dietrich, Madame Leclerc. Their heirs carry the shame. The eagle's truth is theirs to bear." The names were unfamiliar to Miss Marple, but Dr. Henshaw recognized them as minor players in the 1855 diplomatic circles, their descendants likely still prominent in European society. Raymond whistled. "Aunt Jane, this could stir up trouble. What now?" "We inform Inspector Hargreaves," Miss Marple said, "but discreetly. These names are a warning, not a weapon." That evening, Miss Marple met Hargreaves at a quiet cafe near Scotland Yard. He scanned the decoded message, his face grim. "These families are still influential politics, finance, even royalty. Exposing this could cause chaos. I'll pass it to Interpol, but it'll be buried deep." Miss Marple nodded. "Some truths are too heavy for the present, Inspector, but they must be known to prevent their misuse." As she left, a figure watched from across the street, a man slight and gray-haired, his face half hidden by a scarf. Miss Marple's senses prickled, but she kept walking, her umbrella a steady weight. At her hotel she found a note slipped under her door. "You've silenced the eagle, Miss Marple. Leave it be, or the shadows will return. The scribe." She smiled faintly, tucking the note away. The scribe, likely a remnant of the order, was warning her off, but their fear confirmed the truth was safe. She telephoned Hargreaves, alerting him to the watcher, and returned to St. Mary Mead the next day. Back in her cottage, Mrs. Bantry arrived, brimming with questions. "Jane, a musical cipher? Traitors' names? You're a legend?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "No legend, Dolly, just a listener. The eagle's song has ended, and its shadows are fading." As the spring sun warmed her garden, Miss Marple reflected on the Volkov saga. The ledgers, the locket, the medallion, the music, all pieces of a puzzle, now complete. The scribe's threat lingered, but Jane was unafraid. The world was full of whispers, and she was always ready to hear them, her sharp eyes watching for the next shadow to cross her path. Chapter 15. The Last Note. The spring of 1926 had fully blossomed in St. Mary Mead, with the village lanes lined with blooming hawthorn, and the air sweet with the promise of summer. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles moving with their steady rhythm, but her thoughts were far from the tranquil village. The discovery of the musical cipher in the Eagle's Lament had unraveled the final thread of the Volkov-Ashford conspiracy, exposing the names of traitors whose descendants still held sway in European circles. The coded message, now in Interpol's hands, was buried in a secure archive, its potential for chaos contained. Yet the note from the scribe, slipped under Miss Marple's hotel door in London, lingered in her mind, a warning that the eagle's shadow, though fading, had not entirely vanished. A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was young Colin. Ashford, his face flushed with a mix of excitement and unease, clutching a small, ornate box. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low, "this was left at the Manor's gate this morning, addressed to you. No note, no sender. I thought you should see it." She took the box, its surface etched with the familiar double-headed eagle of the Volkovs. Inside was a single object, a miniature silver tuning fork, its prongs engraved with tiny Cyrillic letters. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The tuning fork was no mere trinket. It was a final clue, a resonance of the past. She tapped it gently against the table, and its clear, haunting note echoed in the room, stirring a memory of the organ's melody. In the church, Mrs. Bantry, summoned by a quick telephone call, arrived with her usual enthusiasm. "Jane, another mystery? You're tireless. What's that thing?" Miss Marple held up the tuning fork. "A key, Dolly, in its own way. The note it plays matches the first chord of the Eagle's Lament. I suspect it points to one last secret hidden where the music began." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "The church again? Jane, you're uncanny." That evening, Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry returned to the St. Mary Mead Church, the tuning fork tucked in her reticule. The vicar, Mr. Clement, greeted them with a bemused smile. "Miss Marple, you're turning my church into a treasure trove," he said, unlocking the organ loft. "What now?" "A final note, perhaps," she replied, her voice calm. She sat at the organ, striking the tuning fork to confirm its pitch A minor, the key of the Eagle's Lament. She played the melody again, her fingers precise despite her age, and listened for any anomaly. As the last note faded, a faint hum resonated from the organ's pipes, one of which bore a subtle eagle carving. She reached up, her fingers brushing the pipe, and found a hidden catch. It clicked, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside was a single envelope, its paper brittle but sealed with the Volkov crest. Miss Marple opened it carefully, revealing a letter in Elena Volkov's hand. It dated, "Only weeks ago. Miss Marple, you silenced the eagle's curse, but one truth remains. This is my confession, written to free my family's name. Nikolai's love for Anastasia was his downfall, but his honor was true. The names in the ledger were a distraction. The real traitor was within the Ashford family and uncle, Charles. Ashford, who betrayed Nikolai to save his own skin. Forgive us, and let this end." Mrs. Bantry gasped. "An Ashford traitor? Jane, this is scandalous." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Scandalous, but fitting. The past always circles back to the heart of a family." The next morning, Miss Marple visited Ashford Manor to share the letter with Colin and Lady Beatrice. Beatrice's face paled as she read, her hands trembling. Uncle Charles, I've heard whispers, but never this. He was disgraced, sent abroad. Could he have done this? Miss Marple nodded gently. Secrets fester, Beatrice. This letter clears Nikolai, but it burdens your familia Landreau family. You must decide what to do with it. Colin, his face tight, spoke up. We keep it quiet, don't we? No need to drag it up now. For now, Miss Marple agreed. But the truth has a way of surfacing. I'll send this to Inspector Hargreaves. He'll ensure it's handled discreetly. That afternoon, Miss Marple telephoned Hargreaves, who arrived by evening. He read Elena's letter, his expression grim. This ties up the loose ends, Miss Marple. Charles Ashford's descendants are clean, but this could stir trouble if it leaks. I'll keep it locked away. She inclined her head. Some truths are best kept silent, Inspector, but they must be known to someone. As Hargreaves left, Miss Marple noticed a figure lingering near the manor gate. A young woman, her face half hidden by a scarf. Miss Marple approached, her umbrella a steady weight. May I help you, my dear? The woman hesitated, then lowered her scarf, revealing features reminiscent of Irina Volkov. I'm Marina, Elena's granddaughter. I sent the tuning fork. Grandmother said you'd understand. Miss Marple's eyes softened. And you wish to end the secrets? Marina nodded, tears in her eyes. She wanted the truth out, but safely. You've done that. Miss Marple patted her hand. You've done well, child. The eagle's song is over. Back in her cottage, Mrs. Bantry arrived, brimming with questions. Jane, a secret Ashford traitor, a Volkov granddaughter? You're a miracle. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. No miracle, Dolly, just a matter of listening. The eagle's shadow is gone now. As the spring sun set, Miss Marple's thoughts settled. The Volk of Ashford saga was truly closed, its final note played. Yet the world was never silent, and Jane's sharp eyes remained watchful, ready for the next whisper of mystery. Chapter 16. The Quiet Reckoning. The spring of 1926 had woven a gentle spell over St. Mary Mead, with the village gardens bursting into color and the air alive with the hum of bees. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlor window, her knitting needles clicking in their steady rhythm, but her mind was not entirely at ease. The Volk of Ashford saga had reached its conclusion with the discovery of Elena Volkov's confession in the church organ, revealing Charles Ashford as the true traitor behind Nikolai Volkov's downfall. The letter, now secured by Inspector Hargreaves, had silenced the last echoes of the eagle's curse, and Marina, Elena's granddaughter, had ensured the truth was preserved without reigniting old scandals. Yet Miss Marple's instincts, as sharp as the morning dew, whispered that one final thread remained loose, a reckoning not of secrets, but of hearts. A letter arrived that afternoon, its envelope crisp and bearing a London postmark. The handwriting was unfamiliar, precise but hesitant. Miss Marple, you've ended our family's shame, but one debt remains. Meet me at the Ashford Manor Rose Garden, dusk, May Day. M. The single initial suggested Marina, but the tone was heavier, tinged with a resolve that piqued Miss Marple's curiosity. May Day was tomorrow, and the Rose Garden, a secluded corner of the Ashford estate, was an odd choice for a meeting. She tucked the letter into her reticule, her thoughts Already turning dot, Mrs. Bantry, summoned by a telephone call, burst in with her usual fervor. "Jane, another letter? You're relentless? Who's this M?" Miss Marple's smile was faint. "I suspect Marina Volkov, Dolly, but I'll know more tomorrow. Will you join me at the manor?" "Discreetly, of course." Mrs. Bantry's eyes sparkled. "Discreetly? Jane, you know I'm hopeless at that, but I wouldn't miss it." The rose garden at Ashford Manor was a riot of blooms, their scent heavy in the evening air as dusk settled over St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple, in her grey shawl and sensible hat, stood among the roses, her umbrella a familiar weight. Mrs. Bantry lingered near the garden gate, pretending to admire the flowers while keeping watch. The manor loomed in the distance, its windows glowing softly, and Colin Ashford, alerted by Miss Marple, waited inside with Lady Beatrice, ready to assist if needed. A figure emerged from the shadows, not Marina, but an older man, his face weathered, and his eyes carrying a weight of years. He wore a plain suit, but his posture betrayed a military bearing. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low and accented, "I am Mikhail Volkov, Marina's father, Elena's son. I sent the letter." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene. "Mr. Volkov, I expected your daughter. Why are you here?" Mikhail stepped closer, his hands clasped. "To make amends. You freed my family from a century of shame, but I carry a personal debt. I knew of Charles Ashford's betrayal, learned it from my mother years ago, but I stayed silent, fearing for our lives. I was part of the Order of the Eagle long ago, before I broke away." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "And now you seek forgiveness?" "Not forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking. "Closure. There's one last relic, a locket, not unlike the one you found, containing a letter from Anastasia to my mother, Elena. It's hidden here, in the rose garden, where Anastasia and Nikolai first met. I want the Ashfords to have it, to heal the wound between our families." He led her to a stone bench, its base carved with a faint eagle. Kneeling, he pressed a hidden catch, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a silver locket, twin to the one Miss Marple had received months ago, but this one held a folded letter, its ink faded but legible. She read aloud softly, "Elena, my love for Nikolai was my joy and my ruin. Forgive Charles, for he acted in fear. Let our families find peace. Anastasia." Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, crept closer. "Jane, another locket? This is incredible." Miss Marple handed the locket to Mikhail. "This belongs to the Ashfords, as you said. But why now?" Mikhail's eyes were distant. Marina convinced. "Me? She said you showed her that truth, not silence, brings peace. I'm old, Miss Marple. I want to end this before I go." A rustle in the bushes made them turn. Colin emerged, his face pale but determined. "I heard everything," he said. "Miss Marple, is it true? Can we trust him?" She nodded. "I believe so, Colin. Take the locket to your aunt. Let her decide its place." The next morning, Miss Marple sat with Lady Beatrice and Colin in the manor's drawing-room. Beatrice held the locket, tears in her eyes, as she read Anastasia's letter. "Charles's shame I never knew. But this, it heals something, doesn't it?" Miss Marple's voice was gentle. "It does, Beatrice. Families carry burdens, but they can also carry forgiveness." Colin took the locket, his jaw set. We'll keep it in the family vault, not hidden, but honored. Thank you, Miss Marple. And Mr. Volkov." Mikhail, standing quietly by the door, nodded. "I'll return to Moscow. Marina and I will trouble. You know more." Miss Marple watched him leave, her thoughts settling. She telephoned Inspector Hargreaves, informing him of the locket's discovery, but urging discretion. "No need for archives this time, Inspector. It's a family matter. Resolved." Back. In her cottage, Mrs. Bantry arrived, brimming with excitement. "Jane, a Volkov in the rose garden? A letter of forgiveness? You're a miracle worker." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "No miracles, Dolly, just understanding. The eagle's shadow has faded, and the past is at peace." As the spring sun warmed her parlor, Miss Marple reflected on the long journey from the Countess's arrival to the final locket's discovery. The Vilk of Ashford saga was truly over, its secrets laid to rest with a quiet reckoning. Yet the world was never without whispers, and Jane's sharp eyes remained watchful, ready for the next mystery to stir the stillness of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 17. The gentle close the summer of 1926 drapes St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, with the village gardens bursting with roses and the air humming with the lazy drone of bees. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles clicking. Softly, their rhythm a counterpoint to the quiet satisfaction in her heart. The Volk of Ashford saga had finally reached its end in the rose garden of Ashford Manor, where Mikhail Volkov's revelation of Anastasia's letter had bridged a century-old rift. The locket, now resting in the Ashford family vault, symbolized not just a secret laid bare, but a reconciliation between two families bound by love and betrayal. Yet Miss Marple, ever attuned to the subtleties of human nature, sensed that even a closed book might have a final page waiting to be turned. A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Marina Volkov, Elena's granddaughter, her face softer now, free of the weight of her family's legacy. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, their simplicity a stark contrast to the opulent relics of the past. "Miss Marple," Marina said, her voice steady but warm, "I came to thank you. My father Mikhail says we're free now because of you." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her smile gentle. "Not because of me, my dear. You and your father chose to let the truth breathe. That's no small thing." Marina hesitated, then placed a small sealed envelope on the table. "This is for you. From my grandmother Elena. She wrote it before she was taken into custody. She wanted you to have it." Miss Marple took the envelope, noting the faint eagle seal, now a symbol of closure rather than conspiracy. "Thank you, Marina. Will you stay for tea?" Marina shook her head. "I'm leaving for Moscow tomorrow. Father and I are starting over, away from the shadows. But I'll never forget you." As Marina left, Mrs. Bantry arrived, her curiosity as vibrant as the summer sun. "Jane, was that the Volkov girl? What's in the envelope? Another mystery?" "Miss." Marple's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps, Dolly. Let's see." She opened the envelope, revealing a single sheet in Elena's elegant hand. "Miss Marple, you've given my family peace, a gift beyond measure. This is no secret, no cipher just. Gratitude. The eagle rests, and so must I if ever you visit Moscow. Our home is yours. Elena Volkov." Tucked inside was a pressed violet, its petals fragile but vibrant, a token of a life reclaimed. Mrs. Bantry sighed dramatically. Jane, no hidden vaults, no ciphers, just a thank-you note? I'm almost disappointed. Miss Marple chuckled softly. Not every ending needs a secret, Dolly. Sometimes it's enough to know the story is done. That evening Miss Marple walked to Ashford Manor, the envelope in her reticule. Lady Beatrice and Colin welcomed her in the drawing-room, where the locket now rested in a glass case, a quiet monument to their family's past. Beatrice's face, once etched with worry, was serene. "Jane, you've given us more than we can repay," she said, her voice trembling. "The manor feels lighter now." Colin nodded, his usual nervousness replaced by resolve. "We're restoring the conservatory, Miss Marple, a place for new memories, not old secrets." Miss Marple's smile was warm. "That's wise, Colin. The past teaches, but the future lives." She handed Beatrice Elena's letter. "This is for you, too. A bridge between your families, should you choose to cross it." Beatrice read it, tears welling. "I'll write to Elena. Perhaps we can meet one day." The next morning, Miss Marple sat in her garden, the pressed violet on her table, its delicate form a reminder of the fragility and strength of truth. She had telephoned Inspector Hargreaves, informing him of Elena's letter and Marina's departure, ensuring the authorities knew the Volkov saga was truly at an end. Hargreaves had laughed a rare sound. "Miss Marple, you've tied up every loose end. I almost wish for another mystery to keep you busy." "There's always another, Inspector," she replied, her tone light. "But for now I'm content." Mrs. Bantry arrived for tea, her questions relentless. "Jane, no more eagles? No shadowy scribes? What will you do with yourself?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "I'll knit, Dolly, and watch. The world is never silent, and St. Mary Mead has its own whispers." As the summer sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, Miss Marple's thoughts settled. The Volk of Ashford saga, with its ciphers, lockets, and hidden truths, was complete. The eagle's shadow had faded, replaced by the gentle light of reconciliation. Yet Jane's sharp eyes remained vigilant, her heart ready for the next whisper of mystery, knowing that in the quiet of her village stories were always waiting to unfold.